Good morning. This meeting will come to order. This is a public meeting of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and I'd like to welcome members of the public, market participants, and members of the media who are observing this meeting today. I'm also very pleased to be joined by my colleagues, Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero, Commissioner Mersinger, and Commissioner Pham. In keeping with CFTC tradition, and I want to recognize my predecessor, Chairman Tarbert, I'd like to ask everyone to stand if they'd like and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The Commission is going to consider two agenda items today. First, a notice of proposed rulemaking for governance requirements for derivatives clearing organizations, and a notice of proposed order and request for comment on an application for a capital comparability determination submitted by the Financial Services Agency of Japan. We're now going to move to opening statements. I'll start first, followed by my fellow commissioners in order of seniority. Again, good morning and welcome. In some respects, today's open meeting is a historic event. It's the first open meeting to be held in person at the Commission in almost 2.5 years since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's also the first open meeting to be held with all 5 commissioners since December 2020. And perhaps most notably, it's the first open meeting with our history-making CFTC commissioners. At a time when many across the country have dispensed with the formalities of office life, these public meetings seem to be a sharp contrast to our current day-to-day operations. However, these formalities should serve as a fresh reminder of the importance of the work that we do as a full commission and who we are here for, the American public. On that note, I'm honored to be here today as chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission at this dais, working closely and collaboratively with my colleagues and providing the public a direct view into the critical work that we do. I want to express my great appreciation to our colleagues in the Division of Clearing and Risk and the Market Participants Division for their efforts on the 2 proposals before the Commission today. My intention is to make today the first of many productive and insightful open meetings as our new Commission thoughtfully supports the growth, transparency, and vibrancy of the U.S. derivatives markets. During the pandemic, CFTC staff has continued its diligent oversight of the derivatives markets through an ever-changing range of market events, including historic demand destruction across all commodity classes in the spring of 2020, titanic shifts in global monetary policy, supply chain disruptions, and the more recent Ukraine crisis. These unpredictable events have only intensified the need for price discovery and risk management tools which our markets provide. We'll be considering 2 proposals today, as I mentioned, each representing critical components of CFTC markets, governance requirements for derivatives clearing organizations, and a proposed order and request for comment on the application for capital comparability determination submitted by the Japanese FSA. I'll share my remarks on the respective proposals in greater detail following the staff presentations. I want to thank staff in my office, Abigail Knopf and Alicia Lewis, and of course to my fellow commissioners and their staff for their support and their work to get us here today, which is in fact a historic day. So with that, I'm now going to turn to my colleague, Commissioner Kristen Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Behnam. At the outset of the first open meeting of this recently confirmed and newly formed commission, a complement of 5 and a historic majority women's commission, I'm pleased to offer this opening statement. I thank Chair Behnam, my fellow commissioners, division leadership, and staff for their kind assistance during my first months here at the Commission. I am humbled by the President's confidence in me. It is a privilege to serve and an opportunity to work with and learn from such talented people. Over the last 3 months, I've met with staff of all the divisions who demonstrate expertise, professionalism, and commitment, even as they navigate cutting-edge questions and evaluate issues at the frontier of the future of finance. I'm grateful to the staff for their service to the CFTC and our nation, and their invaluable contribution to the stability and integrity of the global economy. As Chair Behnam mentioned, today we gather to consider two proposals that grow out of our mission. As we gather, we reaffirm two of the greatest strengths of our nation: the continuity of our government and the commitment of its public servants. First, we continue the dialogue of our predecessors regarding the appropriate risk management framework for derivatives clearing organizations. And second, focus on an application for a capital comparability determination from the Financial Services Agency of Japan. In September 2008, the global economy experienced a shock that reverberated across communities, markets, and nations. Regulators, market participants, and citizens witnessed the precipitating collapse of storied financial institutions that made ill-informed bets in an opaque, bespoke, bilateral market characterized by a lack of intermediation or central clearing infrastructure. As international authorities observed, global output and credit markets contracted at a pace not seen since the 1930s. Trade plummeted, jobs disappeared, housing markets trembled, and people worried that the world was on the edge of an economic depression. A year later, G20 leaders gathered at a summit in Pittsburgh to address these concerns. Having identified the catalyst that triggered the economic crisis, and with absolute resolve, they articulated a prescription targeting an under-supervised sector in our markets. All standardized over-the-counter derivative contracts would be traded on exchanges or cleared through central counterparties by 2012. Observing that the period leading to the summit was marked by a critical transition from crisis to recovery, global leaders declared the need to turn the page on an era of irresponsibility and adopt a new set of policies, regulations, and reforms that meet the needs of a 21st century global economy. 12 years ago, President Barack Obama signed the Dodd-Frank Act into law, translating this global imperative into a critical, demanding, and sometimes, for a few people in this room, admittedly thankless, local mission. The Dodd-Frank Act introduced groundbreaking reforms. Nestled in the Dodd-Frank Act, the statute entrusted derivatives clearing organizations with maintaining the integrity of derivatives markets through comprehensive and prudent risk management and risk mitigation practices. I support the proposed governance rulemaking for comment, continuing a broader governance deliberation that dates back to proposals issued over the last decade. The rulemaking addresses recommendations that the Commission received from the Market Risk Advisory Committee, previously sponsored by Chair Behnam, and which I currently sponsor. The recommendations are based on reports by the MRAC Subcommittee on Central Counterparty Risk and Governance. Moving beyond the financial crisis, in February and March of 2020, markets faced deeply concerning shocks: the onset of the COVID-19 global pandemic, destabilizing geopolitical events, and macroeconomic conditions marked by persistent inflation periods and periods of sustained volatility. Alongside these events, our markets demonstrated tremendous resilience, illustrating the necessity and vitality of continuing to reinforce the significance of risk management oversights. Market conditions stress-tested DCOs, and the effectiveness of reforms codified under the Dodd-Frank Act were demonstrated. Undeniably, DCOs demonstrated notable resilience in response to this real-world, real-time crisis, an unanticipated stress test. Clients, clearing members, and CCPs very likely agree that central clearing has increased market stability in the derivatives market. But we must not rest on our laurels. While clearing mandates have contributed to the development of fair and orderly markets, noteworthy concerns persist. CCPs play a critical role as central risk managers in our markets. Increasing clearing mandates has increased dependence on CCPs, concentrating credit and liquidity risks. Some even argue that the concentration creates single points of failure, with the potential to undermine the progress that we have achieved. The second matter we turn to is the notice of proposed order and request for comment on an application for a capital comparability determination from JFSA. The Commission's capital and financial reporting requirements are critical to ensuring the safety and soundness of regulated swap dealers and major swap participants. When the Commission adopted Regulation 23.106 in 2020 as part of the final swap dealer capital rules, we acknowledged undercapitalization was a core issue that precipitated the 2008 financial crisis. Although we are separated from the day that Congress adopted the Dodd-Frank Act by more than a decade, we must continue to be resolute in our focus and unwavering in our commitment. We dare not rest on the resilience of reforms from the last crisis. It is imperative that we remain vigilant. We can already see a new set of novel financial products, innovative use of data, predictive analytics, algorithms, and models, newly styled entities, and emerging market participants and platforms. Each will benefit as they join our ecosystem from the hard lessons learned regarding the indisputable role of risk management and prudential measures. Simply stated, we must prepare to prioritize our common goals and commit to getting this right. As I shared during confirmation hearings, part of what I'm here hopefully to do is raise the comments, questions, and concerns that a diverse group, broad range of stakeholders who value our markets and who are deeply impacted by our markets would want us to raise and bring. Among the values that I hope to emphasize in our conversation today and my service as a commissioner is first, customer protection. It is among, I believe, our highest priorities. And second, maintaining the integrity of our financial markets. I'm thankful to my staff who worked tremendously hard to prepare our remarks for today. I also am thoughtful about the staff and look forward to their presentations and the dialogue with my fellow commissioners. Thank you, Chair Behnam.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. And now I'm going to turn to Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero for her opening remarks.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here at the first open meeting of this new and historic commission. It's truly been an honor and a privilege for me to serve with my fellow colleagues, with Chairman Behnam, with Commissioners Johnson and Mersinger and Pham, who I all care for deeply and respect very much. Chairman Behnam, I'm very appreciative of your leadership, your willingness to listen, be thoughtful, and collaborative. Thank you for putting the matters on the agenda today. And to all my fellow commissioners and the chairman, I have really sincerely benefited from your insights, your experiences, and most of all, your collegiality. And there can be no doubt that the public interest has been served by the diversity of the perspectives you all bring to bear on the issues before us, including the issues today. Like everyone, my views are shaped by my experiences. I was counsel to two chairmen of the Securities and Exchange Commission just prior and during the financial crisis. And since the financial crisis, I have dedicated my entire career and spent it at the Treasury Department, helping our nation recover and build a stronger, safer, more resilient financial system. I've advocated through congressional testimony, public reports, and proposals, specific ways to promote financial stability and reduce risk, particularly systemic risk. I'm firmly of the opinion that regulators should identify to the American public the public interest that is served by the actions that we take. In other words, why does it matter what we do today to the public that we serve? The proposals before us serve the broader public interest of promoting financial stability and reducing systemic risk. First, we have before us a proposal to strengthen the resilience of the clearinghouses that are at the center of our financial markets. This would apply to the full range of clearinghouses, from those designated systemically significant by the Financial Stability Oversight Council to new and future entrants, including in the digital asset space. Second, we have a proposal before us to have strong capital requirements and financial reporting for non-U.S. derivatives dealers who are affiliated with some of our largest bank holding companies. Let me also thank the amazing CFTC staff for their hard work and their professionalism. Our dialogue in the lead up to this open meeting was constructive and thoughtful, and I appreciate you accommodating a number of my requested changes to make these proposals stronger. I also greatly thank my staff, Nora Flood, Phil Raimondi, and Joe Suzuki, and I'll reserve the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll now turn to Commissioner Mersinger for her opening remarks.
Thank you, and it is truly an exciting day, one just to be here in person and see all of your faces, not on a computer screen, but in the room, but also to have this first open meeting with this group. I think this is pretty extraordinary and very excited to get started today. Commissioner Johnson mentioned the humbling experience that this is, and I'd like to also reflect that, because I'm not sure I can describe just how humbling it is to sit at this dais today. I first walked into this room about 3 years ago, And I'm not sure I realized at that point that at someday my name would be on the placard and I would be sitting on this dais where so many other extraordinary people sat before us. I certainly didn't realize I would be sitting amongst this extraordinary group. But we don't always know our destination when we start on our path. And I have had the good fortune to step on this path, continue on this path, and get to know and work with the really dedicated staff here at the CFTC, including the teams we'll hear from today. So thank you in advance for your hard work and for your patience with us, and for always being there when we have questions and concerns. So the items that we are considering today really reflect some of the greatest attributes of the CFTC: the diligent work of our staff and the willingness of market participants to share their expertise and provide recommendations to the CFTC, and coordinating, and the respect for our regulatory counterparts in other jurisdictions. I will save my further remarks for when we discuss each individual proposal. But again, it's just a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner Mersinger. And now I'll turn to Commissioner Pham for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman. Just echoing the comments of my fellow commissioners, I just want to say what a true honor and privilege it is to be here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to work and serve with my fellow commissioners, and I'm looking forward to our years together in the future. I also want to thank my office and team, my Chief of Staff, Megan Tente, my Senior Counsel, Gates Horand, and my Senior Policy Advisor, Keegan Ames. And most of all, I want to thank the dedicated staff of the Commission. They have indeed faithfully executed our mission and the enormous responsibility that we have taken on under the expanded authorities of Dodd-Frank. One of the things that I just want to note is the progress that the world has made since the 2008 financial crisis in implementing the G20 global derivatives reforms. For example, in the Financial Stability Board's OTC Derivatives Market Reforms Implementation Progress Report of December 2021, they've stated that the overall implementation of the OTC derivatives reforms is well advanced, and there's been incremental progress since October 2020 across FSB member jurisdictions. I'll just share a couple statistics with you. There's been significant progress in implementing final higher capital requirements for uncleared derivatives. That's in 15 out of 24 FSB member jurisdictions. For margin requirements for uncleared derivatives, that's in force in 16 jurisdictions, with the expectation that all will be implemented by the compliance date of September 1st, 2020. Trade reporting requirements for OTC derivatives transactions are in force in 23 FSB member jurisdictions, and central clearing requirements are in force in 17 FSB member jurisdictions. I think we can say that truly the world has come together to find a global solution to a global challenge of the financial crisis, and that there are well-developed regulatory frameworks in place in our fellow jurisdictions around the world. Another point that I wanted to raise is that with the implementation of Dodd-Frank, we have had some challenges with getting the rules right. And so we have used various tools that we have at our disposal to try to make sure that we can adjust and fix the rules as necessary when warranted. To that effect, there are 9 no-action letters that expire in the next year. And I do encourage the Commission to come up with a plan to provide regulatory certainty well in advance of the expiration dates. I believe that we should hold ourselves accountable to the same standards we ask of our registrants. Finally, just a couple comments on the proposals that we have here in front of us today. Regarding the proposed capital adequacy and financial reporting comparability determination for non-bank swap dealers located in Japan, I would like to note, first of all, that the staff of the Market Participants Division, formerly the Division of Swap Dealer and Intermediary Oversight has been working very hard on these proposals, and their diligence with these rules has helped make the U.S. financial system safer, and their good work in implementing a comprehensive oversight regime for swap dealers. Both global and domestic markets work best when there are clear and simple rules with common standards. Ensuring that these rules are harmonized minimizes operational complexity that can increase risks and costs. As Commissioner, I take this responsibility to encourage international regulatory harmonization seriously. Significantly, these proposed conditional capital adequacy and financial reporting comparability determination order for Japan is the first of its kind for the Commission. These determinations will set the stage for the capital adequacy and financial reporting determinations to follow for the UK, EU, and Mexico. Therefore, we need to carefully ensure that these determinations are a model for those that come next, and I look forward to that good work being done through the notice and comment process. With that in mind, I would like to also mention that it's important that we uphold principles of deference to home country regulators and promote international regulatory harmonization to mitigate market fragmentation. As others have noted, an approach that favors direct oversight of both domestic and foreign entities often does not recognize that another regulator is already overseeing this activity at issue in a comparable manner. And as I've described, we do have comprehensive derivatives reforms in place in FSB member jurisdictions. Without a model that favors deference through reliance on the home country regulator, trading and clearing becomes more complex, more costly, and less efficient for all market participants. Therefore, one of the things that I will be focused on is to ensure that these proposals properly balance, avoiding weakening the Commission's oversight abilities, but also not unduly constraining cross-border activity. In doing so, I invite commenters to touch upon any of these aspects. Finally, I'm pleased that we will consider a proposal to enhance clearinghouse risk governance. I note that this proposal follows onto the good work and policy recommendations from the Market Risk Advisory Committee. Engaging with the public through roundtables in a transparent manner is the type of good process that results in good outcomes. We should consider other advisory committee recommendations as appropriate, and I thank the chairman for his leadership of and sponsorship of the Market Risk Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pham, and to my colleagues for those wonderful opening statements. So now in a few moments, I'll invite CFTC staff to begin their presentation on the first matter of today's agenda. After the presentation, we will formally open the floor to the commissioners for their questions, comments, and any discussion on the matter presented. And then we will conclude the Commission's discussion with a vote on the matter presented. That sequence will be repeated for the second matter today on the agenda. Each of the votes conducted in this meeting will be a recorded vote. The result of each vote approving a Commission document, should that be the outcome, will be published with the document in the Federal Register. So at this point, I ask for the Commission's unanimous consent to allow staff to make technical corrections to any documents approved at this meeting as necessary to prepare such documents for publication in the Federal Register or to otherwise finalize them.
Yes.
Second.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Hearing no objections, consent for staff technical corrections is hereby granted by the Commission. At this time, I'd like to welcome staff from the Division of Clearing and Risk for their presentation on the first matter on today's agenda. As I've said, a notice of proposed rulemaking on governance requirements for derivatives clearing organizations. Presenting to us will be Clark Hutchinson, Director of the Division of Clearing and Risk, Eileen Donovan, Deputy Director of the Clearing Policy Branch in DCR, Tad Polly, an Associate Director in the Clearing Policy Branch in DCR, who is joining us virtually from Chicago, and Joe Oprin, Special Counsel in the Clearing Policy Branch in DCR, who is also joining us virtually from Chicago. So with that, Clark, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you. Before I begin my remarks, I just want to say that I, too, feel delight in being in this room again in front of all of you, and true delight in the fact that we have a new commission in 2022 where we can get back to work and accomplish a lot of the things that we want to accomplish. And I have to say that as we've navigated this particular proposal together in the last few weeks and getting our our feet under us as a group. We in the Division of Clearing and Risk have enjoyed working with you and your staff. So truly a delight to be here. And it's nice to have fellow colleagues that I haven't seen in many years. So with that, on to business. So this morning, I will be providing an overview of the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NPRM, of governance of clearinghouses. The NPRM involves proposed revisions to the Commission's existing regulation, 39.24, regarding derivatives clearing organization, or DCO, governance that have resulted from recommendations issued by the Commission's Market Risk Advisory Committee, commonly known here as the MRAC. On February 23, 2021, the MRAC approved a report prepared by its Central Counterparty and Governance Committee, which I will refer to today as the subcommittee. And that committee provided the Commission with several recommendations on DCO risk governance for its consideration. The subcommittee report laid out the perspectives of both clearing member and end user members of the subcommittee on one hand, and DCO members on the other. While the report reflects some areas of disagreement on some topics, the two groups reached a general consensus on how DCO governance might be improved through new Commission regulations. The NPRM proposes several amendments to Regulation 3924 that are consistent with the subcommittee's recommendations. There are two primary topics at issue in the proposal, which I will discuss in turn. First, the proposal would require a DCO to establish one or more risk management committees, or RMCs, and require its board to consult with and consider and respond to input from its RMCs on matters that could materially affect the risk profile of the DCO. And second, the proposal would require each DCO to establish one or more market participant risk advisory working groups in order to seek risk-based input from a broader array of market participants. So now to discuss risk management committees. With respect to risk management committees, the NPRM proposes new regulation 39.24B11, which would require a DCO to maintain governance arrangements that establish one or more RMCs and require a DCO's board of directors to consult with and consider and respond to input from an RMC on all matters that could materially affect the risk profile of the DCO. This requirement would provide a consistent, formalized forum for DCOs to solicit, consider, and address input from clearing members and end users before making decisions that could materially affect their risk profile. While serving on an RMC, clearing members and end users would have an enhanced role in DCO governance and would be able to use their risk management expertise to promote the safety and efficiency of the DCO and the stability of the broader financial markets. The proposed rule would identify a non-exhaustive list of matters that could materially affect the risk profile of a DCO, including any material change to the DCO's margin model, default procedures, participation requirements, and risk monitoring practices, as well as the clearing of new products. The proposal would require DCOs to maintain written policies and procedures to make certain that the RMC consultation process is described in detail, and require the DCO to document the board's consideration of and response to risk management committee input. In addition, DCOs would be required to establish fitness standards for RMC members, maintain policies to ensure each RMC includes representatives from clearing members and customers of clearing members, and maintain policies that require the membership of each RMC to be rotated on a regular basis. The proposed requirement that RMCs include clearing members and customers of clearing members recognizes the stake that these parties have in the financial integrity of the DCO and the need to ensure that they can express their input and concerns, as well as the fact that the DCOs benefit from their unique perspective and expertise on risk management matters. The proposed requirement that the membership of the RMC be rotated on a regular basis promotes the ability of clearing members and customers of clearing members from a broad array of market segments to provide their expertise, and helps ensure that the RMC provides the DCO with fresh perspectives on risk management matters. Finally, the NPRM proposes a new regulation, 3924C3, that would require a DCO to maintain policies designed to enable its RMC members to provide independent expert opinions in the form of risk-based input on all matters presented to the RMC for consideration, and perform their duties in a manner that supports the safety and efficiency of the DCO and the stability of the broader financial system. This proposal is based on the belief that RMC members must be able to serve as independent experts, neither beholden to their employer's particular interests nor acting as fiduciaries of the DCO in order to provide objective input to the DCO's board. Secondly, risk advisory working groups. The second primary aspect of the NPRM proposes new regulation 3924B12, which would require a DCO to establish one or more market participant risk advisory working groups to provide input on all matters that could materially affect the risk profile of the DCO. These groups would be required to consist of a broad array of market participants, such that a diverse cross-section of the DCO's clearing members and customers of clearing members are represented. The proposal would further require the groups to convene at least quarterly and require DCOs to maintain policies and procedures regarding the formation and role of each risk advisory working group. The proposal recognizes that the risk advisory working groups can serve a valuable function in supplementing the DCO's RMC. Practical considerations, most notably the size of a typical RMC and the significant time commitment that an RMC would require of its members in its role of formally consulting with the DCO's board, will limit the number of representatives that can serve on an RMC at any given time. DCO risk advisory working groups, which the proposal would require to include a diverse cross-section of the DCO's clearing members and their customers, will further expand and diversify the information available to a DCO while making material risk decisions and expand opportunities for those with a stake in DCO risk management to provide input. As mentioned previously, while the proposed rules relate to areas in which the clearing member and end user and DCO representatives in the subcommittee generally agreed, excuse me, there were other governance topics discussed in the report on which the subcommittee members did not reach clear agreement. The NPRM requests comment on a number of these topics for the Commission's consideration and potential use in future rulemaking. These topics include DCO consultation of market participants prior to submission of rule change submissions made pursuant to Part 40 of the Commission's rules, and DCO policies regarding the ability of RMC members to share certain types of DCO information with others who work at their employer in order to obtain additional expert opinion that may assist the DCO's risk management. So with that, we hope this information has been helpful, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that the Commission may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Clark. To formally open the Commission's discussion and consideration of the matter just presented by staff, I'll now entertain another motion for the approval and issuance of the notice of proposed rulemaking on governance requirements for derivatives clearing organizations as presented in the voting draft circulated to the Commissioners.
Mr. Chairman, I so move.
Second.
Thank you. With that, the floor is now open for the Commission's deliberations on this matter. I'd like to begin by offering a few questions and views of my own. I'm going to start with a short statement, and then I'll ask a few questions of staff. The last several years have tested the resilience of the derivatives markets and post-financial crisis reforms more generally in ways that a few risk scenarios could have contemplated. Despite a resoundingly strong response to the numerous market shocks, the global regulatory community, in concert with market participants, has appropriately debated the need for additional tools, resources, and rules to manage these and future risks. As farmers, ranchers, corporates, pension funds, insurers, and other market participants continue to turn to the derivatives markets for risk management and price discovery, it's critical that derivatives clearing organizations clearing these products sufficiently calibrate their risk management tools and frameworks to meet the most extreme but plausible tail events. DCOs with governance structures that embrace the diverse risk-based views of clearing members and their clearing members' customers will be better situated to refine their risk management frameworks to withstand extreme but plausible market conditions while promoting financial stability. With an ever-evolving risk landscape, including new clearing structures, new product innovation, and the emerging risk of climate change, to name just a few, it's critical that DCO's governance arrangements and fitness standards evolve. That's why I support today's proposal to amend the governance requirements for DCOs and CFTC Regulation 39.24 to enhance the role of clearing members and customers of clearing members in the risk governance process for DCOs. A DCO's robust risk management framework is particularly critical because of the systemic nature of clearinghouses and the integral role that DCOs have played in promoting financial stability. Today's DCO governance proposal is a direct outgrowth of the work of the Central Counterparty Risk and Governance Subcommittee of the Commission's Market Risk Advisory Committee, which Clark mentioned. The subcommittee's February 2021 report to the MRAC provided several recommendations for improving DCO governance standards that the Commission is proposing today to amend CFTC Regulation 39.24. First, the Commission proposes to require each DCO to establish one or more risk management committees to consult with clearing members and clearing member customers prior to making any decisions that can materially affect the risk profile of the DCO. Under the proposal, the DCO would need to consult with the RMC for material changes to a DCO's margin model, default procedures, participation requirements, risk monitoring practices, and clearing of new products. The proposal would further require a DCO to have written policies and procedures related to the RMC's consultation process, composition, and rotation of the membership on a regular basis. As proposed, the DCO would be required to establish and enforce appropriate fitness standards for RMC members. The Commission also proposes that a DCO maintain policies that are designed to enable RNC members to provide independent, expert opinions in the form of risk-based input on all matters presented to the RMC for its consideration. Second, the Commission proposes to require each DCO to establish one or more risk advisory working groups, or RWGs, as a forum to seek risk-based input, as opposed to commercially driven input, from a broader array of market participants on matters that could materially affect the DCO's risk profile. The Commission proposes to require a DCO to maintain written policies and procedures related to the formation and role of each RWG, which would be required to convene at least quarterly. Finally, the Commission is also requesting comment on the consultation process to add or amend a DCO rule, disclosure of opposing views in a rule submission, and whether DCOs should be required to maintain policies and procedures designed to enable an RMC member to share certain types of information in order to obtain additional expert opinions. Today's proposal is an extremely positive and critical step towards further enhancing the effectiveness of the CFTC's governance standards. Strengthening the clearing ecosystem and developing a DCO governance policy has been a priority of mine since I joined the Commission in 2017. As chair, this critical market infrastructure will remain a focus, and I look forward to taking a data-driven approach to support any possible enhancements to the agency's oversight of DCOs, ensuring coordination and consistency with both our domestic and international partners as we collectively pursue our shared goals of both market resiliency and financial stability. Today is a big step, and the Commission will continue to monitor the clearing ecosystem and engage market participants on DCO risk and governance issues in the future. So again, thanks, Clark, for your presentation, and to your staff for putting this together, for working with my staff and the Commission staff. Just a few questions before I pass on the opportunity to my colleagues. The proposed rule promotes increased transparency and accountability. And this has been an issue, as I mentioned in my statement, that I have been dealing with, I think, in a very positive way since 2017. There's a natural friction between the two main participants in the clearing ecosystem, the clearing members and the clearing houses themselves. And in many respects, as I mentioned, we have collective interests in both market resiliency and financial stability, and I think both do a very good job at that. However, there are naturally divergent interests in some parts between the clearing members and the clearing houses. And as you mentioned, there are a number of work streams within that MRAC subcommittee, and unfortunately, we did not reach consensus on many, and this was certainly not due to a lack of effort and hard work. And I have to give a lot of credit to the members of that committee who worked tirelessly over many, many months. But ultimately, in this recommendation itself, focusing on governance, it's critical, and one could argue that it sort of overlays many of the other work streams that were considered. And it really comes down to communication and transparency and accountability. And I firmly believe, and I hope this is the outcome, but we'll see, depending on my colleagues' view and what we see from the comments, that with increased transparency and accountability, many of the other issues that are of concern to both parties could be resolved. They could be resolved through debate and deliberation and a more robust communication flow between both parties, and keeping each other accountable for what their vested interests are and what we collectively, both as the regulator and the market participant, share as our outcomes and our goals. So if you could comment, and this is a very sort of big picture question, but thinking about the proposed rule, or Eileen or staff, how does this in fact promote increased transparency and accountability, and what should we hope to expect if in fact the commission does approve this rule in the future?
Thank you for the question, Chairman Behnam. I couldn't agree with you more that communication is essential. And I think, as you've heard me say in other remarks at other times, good regulation requires good communication. And I think it's not just for regulators, but I think it's for the people whom we regulate. And I have to say that you're right. For a very long time, there has been a debate between clearinghouses, clearing members, and market participants about the role of who should govern what and how. And I think what this rule proposal does today is it gets out in front of that, and I think effectively will address what has been that conundrum. And I think it does that by some of the features that we outlined in the proposal. One, we're asking that risk committees have competent people who understand risk, and I think that's important, so that at least people have experts that know what they're talking about so that they can talk about it intelligently. Secondly, I think broad-based participation. I think that it is true that clearinghouses run their own show, but I think that clearing members run their show and the market participants do what they need to do in markets. And each of them has a unique perspective, unique risk profile, and those need to be harmonized. And the way that's done through our Risk Management Committee proposal and Risk Working Group proposal is that those entities come together and need to consult one another and need to communicate. We are forcing that communication, and I think through that forcing, so to speak, that this rule would ask for, people will come to conclusions that heretofore they haven't been able to come to, because they've been talking at each other rather than with each other. And finally, I'd say that what I think is going to help, and to your big picture question, I think that this is a good demonstration for governance generally. We are leading the way in governance of clearinghouses at the CFTC, and I think it will help with governance of clearinghouses outside of our jurisdiction as well. We're setting a good example.
Thanks, Clark. I appreciate that. You touched on the importance and the role of independent experts. And I think we both know, you as well as anyone in this room, about the challenge of finding independent experts and finding individuals who have what ends up becoming a very bespoke expertise when it comes to CCPs and the functionality of a clearinghouse. So if you could talk for a second, and you mentioned this in your remarks, the proposed rule addresses the clearing members' employees' management of conflicts of interest. Their incentives, their duties. This kind of goes to our previous discussion, my first question about we all have different vested interests. How does the rule prioritize, how does the rule address the conflicts of interest of the clearing member rep as it relates to prioritizing safety and soundness of the clearinghouse itself, any duty that individual may have to shareholders, as we know from corporate law requirements, and then ultimately advancing the interests of their firm itself?
I think that, first of all, we recognize exactly what you just said. There is a matter that needs to be discussed, and why we ask for comment about just that subject. And I'll just say this, I think it is natural to expect that if you're a clearing member and you work for a firm, you have that firm's interest in your mind. And when you're on the risk committee, you need to have the risk committee's interests in your mind for the clearinghouse. And therein lies that natural conflict. But I also think there's an element of practicality where if a clearinghouse is safe and sound, it's good for the clearinghouse. It's also very good for the clearing member, and I think there's a natural alignment that can occur. So we ask the question because we recognize the benefit of that natural alignment, but also the conundrum of the conflict of interest question, and we look forward to responses that we receive from people regarding their feelings about that.
Thanks, Clark. I do want to thank you again. I want to thank Eileen, Tad, and Joe as well for all the work. Not only do I think the rule text amendments are fantastic, and again, something that I'm very proud to see, sort of come to fruition after many years of hard work. But as you pointed out in your statement, we don't stop where the subcommittee found consensus. We ask a number of very targeted questions to further, I think, invite debate around these issues, because as I think we all know, as we've all experienced, especially in the past 2 years, clearinghouses have performed quite well. A lot of different factors that we could not have predicted, even under the most extreme circumstances and extreme risk scenarios. But as my colleague said, these reforms that are now nearly 12 years old have built a more resilient financial system, and we owe that to the CCPs. But our work is never done. I think it's globally recognized that CCPs play a critical role within the financial system, and I don't think that's going to change. I think, in fact, that's only going to increase. And that puts the onus on us as a commission, as an agency, to continue to work hard, to continue to understand the issues that are associated with CCPs, to continue to listen to all parties involved, and there are a lot of them, and they all have very different views. But that is, in many respects, what our responsibility is. I think we all take it very seriously, and I think in the end, the outcomes can be very positive for our domestic financial system, but the global financial system, in representing what a wonderful agency this is, but more importantly, what great work we do, and what care we take to the responsibility we have within our mission. So thanks again to the team. I don't have any more questions, so I am going to pass it to my colleague, Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you so much, Chairman Behnam. I, too, have an opening statement and then a number of questions. But even before I begin to share from the statement, I want to just thank Clark and Eileen for the time that you've taken to carefully share with us, with me in my office, as we prepared for today's meeting, and also as we will continue in dialogue after today and through the finalization of the rule. I also want to acknowledge, as my fellow Commissioner Pham has done, and I alluded to in my opening remarks, Chair Behnam, in his leadership of the MRAC. As sponsor for the MRAC, a lot of the work that is before us today is a result of work of that advisory committee. The proposed rulemaking addresses recommendations that the Commission received from its Market Risk Advisory Committee and based on a report prepared by MRAC's Subcommittee on Central Counterparty Risk and Governance. Thanks so much to Chair Behnam for his leadership with respect to the development and guidance of the MRAC. I would also acknowledge Commissioner Sharon Bowen, if I might, just for a moment. I was reviewing opening statement remarks from a number of commission meetings in preparation for this meeting and stumbled across the inaugural meeting of the MRAC's opening statement from Commissioner Bowen, and just would be thoughtful about her and her visionary leadership in the development of the MRAC during her tenure as well. I also would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to just acknowledge the subcommittee's co-chairs, Alicia Crichton and Lee Betzel, and their leadership, as well as Alicia Lewis, who's here on the dais with us, special counsel to the chair, for her exceptional stewardship as DFO of the MRAC. The subcommittee's report is the product of its membership's collective hard work. The subcommittee's report reflects efforts on the part of a diverse group of voices to come together and identify in a single space, concisely and effectively, reforms that could be adopted to further risk management oversight for DCOs. At this point, I'd like to just take a moment and reflect a little bit about what exactly it is that we're focused on in today's notice of proposed rulemaking specifically, and to acknowledge that I'm supportive of the proposal's thrust. DCO Core Principle O expressly directs each DCO to establish governance arrangements that, quote, permit the consideration of the view of owners and participants. But there are certain aspects of the proposal that I think we could imagine might be enhanced, and I suspect they were largely part of conversations that both Clark and Chair Behnam have acknowledged may be on the horizon for future consideration. The proposed regulations supplement government's requirements that are consistent with principles of financial markets infrastructure, PFMIs, published by the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures and the Technical Committee on International Organization of Securities Commissions, or IOSCO. In 2013, the Commission revised Part 39, Derivatives Clearing Organizations, of its regulations to fully implement PFMI standards for systemically important DCOs. In 2020, the Commission extended PFMI compliant CIDCO governance to all DCOs as part of a broader revision of Part 39. And this is where I'd like to focus much of my attention today. In fact, the focus of the remarks that I'll share with you all are largely growing out of Core Principle O and Core Principle P, as well as Core Principle Q and their interrelationship. DCOs may be structured in many different ways, and this is where my questions for the staff will grow out of or begin today. There is no statutory or regulatory prescription for a particular business structure. DCOs may be incorporated, operate as limited liability companies or partnerships, and may be organized outside the United States. The structure under which a DCO is organized and the committees or organizational infrastructure can profoundly impact the functioning of the risk management committees and risk advisory working groups. So in preparation for today's meeting, my staff did a little bit of homework, if you will, that I'll follow up on in just a moment. I think it's important that I say from the outset that it's imperative that we think carefully about tailoring risk management oversight in a manner that effectively addresses the complexities of business structures and relationships in order to effectively ensure DCOs internalize the perspectives of clearing members and end users. Public comments on these points will be tremendously helpful, and I would welcome, my door will always be open to the broadest range of constituents that we service and support, to comment on whether certain organizational structures might trigger enhanced governance requirements or whether traditional targeted exemptive authority should be part of an expanding enhanced governance requirements for DCOs. Second, I'll share that the proposal's enhanced consultation requirements are triggered when DCOs make a decision that may have a material impact on the DCO's risk profile. I've shared with the staff and will reserve for later discussion, but hopefully following some useful comments received from the community, this question of what exactly we mean by material impact and what we mean by the DCO's risk profile. So some of the questions that I will raise will grow out of this as well. Notably, the proposal applies the new risk profile standard to be triggered when certain decisional consultation requirements have been met or fail to be met. I think this is a tremendously important issue. And part of the reason is because when we think about what triggered the financial crisis, what were the catalysts that led to such tremendous economic and economic decline, we find risk management rests at the center of many of the failed risk management or governance requirements adopted by failed market participants. Turning to the homework that I described and the questions that I have for the staff, I want to begin by noting that our research may be imperfect. So your data may be different and probably is better. But our back of the envelope estimation is that the Commission currently has 15 registered DCOs to the best of our ability to grasp. We're thoughtful about the fact that 12 already have risk management committees, and these risk management committees have governance charters. We also took an exceptional amount of time to carefully plow through publicly available information for DCOs regarding the appointment of chief risk officers. My first question for the staff is if you could possibly help us understand exactly how the appointment of a risk management committee that is comprised of diverse participants, including clearing members, their clients, or at least representatives of their clients and end users, will be helpful in ensuring the governance of clearinghouses.
Thank you. Good morning. I think that, and I think we think that diversity is always a good thing. And clearinghouses having broad representation of their participants included in their both governance and risk assessment protocols is a very good thing. And we think it is a fact that a market participant or a customer, a user of the markets, has a point of view. We think that clearing members who guarantee the performance of their customers have a point of view, and certainly a DCO who has to run a clearinghouse and manage all that has to be managed has a point of view. And having those points of view come together creates an environment that I think is more robust than just having a DCO look at things in the way that they look at them. And so I think, to answer your question, it's this diversity and competency of people who will now be participating with one another and having discussions that are required will lend to a better outcome than what we have today. And to your point about where we, in 2008, perhaps had some failures, I think this will go a long way to identifying matters that would otherwise be perhaps not looked at.
That's quite helpful. Thanks, Clark. I want to just understand, though, and part of the reason we did the homework was to appreciate exactly what the channels of information flow would be with respect to, and this may be a question more reserved for the commentary that will follow, but we're thoughtful about your expectations or aspirations for how information flows from the risk management committee that is comprised of clearing members or representatives of their clients and end users, as well as the DCO, will engage with the risk management committees existing for the DCOs, which are fairly diversified. So completely appreciate.
I want to make sure I understand your question, because I'm not sure I do, so excuse me for that. Is your question that there are existing risk management committees today that function in the way that they function, and we are proposing that there be either new and additional risk management committees or reformulation of existing risk management committees that would conform to some of what we're asking for today? Is that your question?
That is
How
the
that's gonna
question,
happen?
yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think on the one hand, we want to leave that up to DCOs. Mm-hmm. DCOs are different, and no one size fits all. And I think if we were too prescriptive, that might not be beneficial to the outcome that we're seeking. Secondly, I think that we're leaving it a little bit up to DCOs for another reason, which is we have, as you know, applications for new kinds of DCOs coming to us, and again, not one size fits all. So I will admit there's a bit of an open question, or perhaps even vagueness, that's intentional, so that DCOs can have this reformulation, so to speak, at their own discretion. So I think that's an answer to your question.
That answers my question, and I'll simply share that by way of response. Our efforts to really understand the diversity of DCOs led us to conclude that some would be organized as corporations, and the chair referenced earlier corporations law, and would have a board of directors, and perhaps that board of directors would have a risk management committee. The members of the board of directors would have fiduciary duties to the DCO that flow to the shareholders or owners of the DCO, whereas in other contexts, we can imagine, as you know, there is no one size fits all. The DCO may be organized as a limited partnership or a limited liability company. In each case, though, we're hopeful that there is a way to prescribe an appropriate obligation, if you will, to effectuate the promise of what we believe is outlined in the committee report. So we're acknowledging the diversity of the different DCOs, how they might be different they might be organized as different business organizational forms, but appreciating that there should be some single obligation or responsibility with respect to exactly how the RMC that might exist as part of the board would interface with, and would likely be comprised of board members, would interface with the RMCs that we're thoughtful about forming. I guess this also leads to another sort of set of questions that was raised by something you said during the presentation, and that's this notion of potential fiduciary obligations. I think when you described it, you were talking about independent experts and the necessity of independent expertise, and the ability of risk management committee members to effectively present the issues that materially impact DCO risk, and to sustain or suspend, if you will, during their service at least, the affiliation that they may have with their employer. This is an issue my office will be exceptionally curious to hear in the commentary about as well, including how we might define that independence and what types of standards we might look to help us truly effectuate that promise. In terms of relational informational channels, I'm also deeply thoughtful about the risk working group. And from the proposal, couldn't completely appreciate exactly what the relationship with the risk working group and the risk management committees might be. If you could describe that quickly, that would be helpful.
Well, again, I think on purpose, we left that interaction or that connection between the two groups a bit open for interpretation by each individual DCO, because as we've agreed before, not one size fits all. But I think it's clear to us that a risk management committee can only have so many people, as we said in our proposal, given time constraints, interaction with a board, et cetera, that there can't be a huge crowd giving their opinions to a board. But in order to solve that problem, we like the idea of a risk working group where a great many more people can get together on a regular basis, share views, debate, come with ideas or proposals or concerns, whatever they may be. And then when those conclusions, proposals, concerns are amalgamated, how that then intersects with, I should say, the risk management committee or indeed the board, I think needs to be worked out. And I think that that's the need that we call for policies and procedures being put in place. So it's a bit open, I agree, but it's open on purpose, again, to accommodate the idea that not one size fits all.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Clark. I think the pieces to the puzzle or the threads that it was difficult to sort of sew through the entire document sort of relate in part to how frequently the risk working group would convene, what its agenda would be, whether it would be set out in writing, and whether there would be written policies and procedures governing the risk working group. So there are, I think, lots of opportunity areas, I might say, to clarify exactly what that forum would be. I think it could be an amazingly important forum. The other piece to the puzzle, though, that I'd highlight is having it convene quarterly might not be ideal, in part because, as we've noted from sustained periods of volatility in recent times, there can be exceptional crises that arise that really could necessitate a more frequent engagement of that risk working group. So I think there was a little bit of an emphasis on quarterly meetings, so I thought there might be some kind of report up to the risk management committee. I'll pause because I think you're going to say something.
Well, no, I think part of the devilish beauty of the notice of proposed rulemaking is that as much as we propose, we also ask questions. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't agree more with some of the issues or questions that you're proposing yourself. And we look forward actually to the feedback of the people who will be taking this to heart, because as we've said, not one size fits all, and we have to be cognizant of how the prescription would fit the people whom we're regulating. So I look forward actually to exploring the questions that you're asking, because I think that needs to come back to us in the form of responses to these questions. And then as we draft the subsequent rulemaking, we can fit some of these particulars more prescriptively in the rule itself. And clearly we will be working with your office to do that. But I agree with the questions you're asking and the points that you raise.
Thanks, Clark. I just sort of maybe then share a few bullet points rather than raise them individually. So I'm thoughtful about the role of the chief risk officer, whether that person's a member of the risk management committee or the risk working group, and sort of deeply thoughtful that that person, in some contexts where risk management oversight has been carefully thought out, might report directly to the board and be a really important channel of communication about material risk concerns. I'm also deeply thoughtful about the use of classes. I think that you identified classification as an approach to organize an orderly and continuing rotation of risk management committee board members. I think that's going to be a critical part of ensuring that you have that diversity of viewpoints, as well as probably a balanced membership plan for the risk management committee. And then you also noted staggering the terms of classes of risk management committee members. I think those pieces are all excellent examples of best practices and good corporate governance that we have noted in many contexts, but particularly in the context of risk management oversight imposed by prudential regulators and expressly in the Dodd-Frank Act for banking institutions. So I applaud your thoughtfulness in aggregating those really critical obligations, that there be written policies and procedures, that written work product would flow, and the channels through which that information might flow. I have just one last really quick question that's probably pushing on a point you've made several times. So wise of you to anticipate this point that I just want to highlight and underscore. To a certain extent, all of this seems really brilliant because we've learned the lessons of the last crisis. And what we learned is that if you introduce effective risk management oversight, you can anticipate or at least spot sometimes the kinds of things that are deeply concerning with respect to the aggregation of risk in certain spaces or concentration of risk in certain spaces or correlation among risks. As we imagine and experience the financial market ecosystem that we operate in expanding to introduce market participants who might not be engaged in the use of intermediaries, I'm curious to know if you've already began to think about, outline, and consider, or if you're welcoming comments about how we can think through risk management oversight in the context of those entities, particularly as, going back to my original point, from an organizational perspective and then from a jurisdictional choice of domicile perspective. We might be dealing with entities that are not organized in the United States. They might not be organized as corporations. They may not engage intermediation. We can also imagine that ultimately in some sci-fi world, they're fully controlled by algorithms. So I'm just deeply thoughtful about how you're planning for the future as entities and financial products evolve to really address the risk management concerns envisioned here.
I think we are thinking alike. I think you know that in front of us we have several proposals for non-intermediated clearinghouses, and how's that going to work? What's risk governance going to look like? Who's doing it? Maybe it's an algorithm. What's the protocol for having consultation with an algorithm? I mean, I think these are, not to make light of it, but interesting questions that I will admit I don't think we have exactly the answers for at this point. But I also think the devil is in the detail, which is it usually is, of each individual proposal that comes to us with how they navigate, for example, disintermediation and what that means in their context. We have to consider in light of this proposal. And as you know, we are principle-based regulators, and what we're trying to do here is put together some principles that are flexible enough to live through what it is that we know now and what it is that might come in the future. And I think the design here is to not be too prescriptive at the start, invite people who might be applying to us with these new types of clearinghouses to comment on how this might work for them or not work for them, and lend solutions through their commentary, for which we can then think about that as it comes through and put forth a final rule. But I couldn't agree with you more that it's an interesting question when you have market participants be direct members of a clearinghouse, and how's that going to work on a risk committee?
Thank you so much, Clark and Eileen, for the presentation. I am committed to partnering with you as we really puzzle through some of these more difficult questions, because they will be critical to risk management oversight in the future. Chair Behnam, I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you. And seeing that Commissioner Johnson has concluded her remarks, I now recognize Commissioner Goldsmith Romero for the purpose of making any comments and asking any questions that she may have.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Clark and Eileen, for the thoughtful presentation and the answers to the questions. I'm not going to ask any questions today. I'll reserve for follow-up after I hear from my remaining fellow commissioners and your answers. But as you know, I asked a lot of questions that ended up in the release, and in one way or another, whether it was a question or some additional language, and I'm very grateful for that. And the chairman today asked some really important questions that I also had in my mind. So I appreciate that, as well as Commissioner Johnson, excuse me. So instead, I'll give a statement, and I do thank you for working so closely with me in my office. I support the Commission's efforts to strengthen the resilience of clearinghouses to future risk. including through this proposed rule. Since the 2008 financial crisis, as I said earlier, I've spent my entire career in federal public service, helping our nation recover and build a stronger, safer, more resilient financial system. And I've seen how clearinghouses play an important public interest role, one of critical market infrastructure that fosters financial stability, trust, and confidence in U.S. markets. The Financial Stability Oversight Council, FSOC, has recognized this public interest role, designating several clearinghouses as systemically important financial market utilities. FSOC's designation highlights the important role that we at the Commission play in the oversight of clearinghouses. So thank you to the staff for taking this oversight role so seriously. Thank you for working closely with me to improve the proposal in ways that will facilitate effective oversight by the Commission and promote greater accountability, transparency, and predictability. The chairman highlighted today in his remarks the importance of accountability and transparency in this area, and I agree with the chairman's statements on those important public interests. Clearinghouses serve as a cornerstone to mitigating risk in U.S. markets. The 2008 financial crisis revealed that over-the-counter trades left market participants vulnerable to the weaknesses of their counterparties and left regulators in the dark about hidden risk. In contrast, clearinghouses, who put themselves in the center of counterparties, take on counterparty risk, and bring transparency to the markets and to regulators. So one important post-crisis reform was to increase central clearing of trades in U.S. markets, putting clearinghouses in even more of a public interest role. However, this has resulted in a concentration of more risk in clearinghouses, as Commissioner Johnson discussed so well in her opening statement. FSOC found that the failure or disruption of systemically important clearinghouses, quote, could create or increase the risk of significant liquidity or credit problems spreading among financial institutions or markets, and thereby threaten the stability of the U.S. financial system, end quote. The systemic nature of clearinghouses registered with the Commission further underscores the need for vigilant oversight by the Commission. Under the Commission's oversight, clearinghouses have shown resilience in navigating an ever-growing list of recent market stress events, as the chairman noted. They have helped U.S. markets maintain financial stability during the global pandemic, supply chain issues, and geopolitical events. However, uncertainty surrounding these events has driven home the need for the Commission to enhance its rules so that clearinghouses strengthen their resilience to future risk. The public interest role of clearinghouses is best served when the clearinghouses work with their clearing members who have much at stake, as Clark has mentioned, as they shoulder the burden of losses and defaults. Clearinghouses, members, and end users should work collaboratively to decide how to increase the resilience of their respective clearinghouse and how to best navigate risk during times of market stress. Simply put, there is strength in numbers and diversity of perspective. We have seen how clearinghouses have benefited from risk management committees and other working groups that reflect a broad coalition of stakeholders. Their voices should be heard in a meaningful way. Today, the Commission proposes formalizing requirements for these committees. And I appreciate the discussion by the chairman about conflicts of interest, which was a question and concern that I also had. So thank you for asking that question in the proposal. We propose a requirement for the consideration of input from members of risk committees on matters that could strengthen or weaken the resilience of the clearing organization to future risk. The proposed rule seeks to balance the calls of those on the committees for increased transparency, predictability, and a voice in risk management with the clearinghouse's calls for flexibility and consideration of their own internal opinions on risk. And commenters will tell us whether we've gotten this balance right in a way that will strengthen the resilience of clearinghouses to future risk while keeping it agile to respond to sudden market events. Additionally, we endeavor to formalize governance rules that promote accountability of clearinghouses and facilitate oversight by the CFTC. As you said, Clark, this proposal would lead to a better outcome than we have today. Both accountability and oversight are served in the proposal through written policies and procedures and documentation that stakeholder voices have been solicited and heard. I hope that requirement could resolve the outstanding issues, as the chairman has noted. The proposal is not prescriptive about the contents of the policies and procedures, but I care greatly about having a requirement for written policies and procedures accompanied by documentation of the consideration of input. Those requirements will benefit the full range of clearinghouses, from the systemically significant clearinghouses to the new or future clearinghouses, as you mentioned, Clark, which also includes those in the digital asset space, who may not have a history of risk management committees. It is my hope that over time, a requirement for policies and procedures will serve as a launch pad for best practices to emerge. I look forward to public comment on the additional opportunities on how the Commission can effectively advance best practices, including the question of whether the Commission should require the publication of the policies and procedures and whether the Commission should be more prescriptive about the content. I also look forward to comments on whether meetings of risk advisory working groups should be documented to ensure that those members' voices are adequately heard and considered in a meaningful way. Today's proposal serves as an important first step to promote accountability, transparency, and predictability, and facilitate effective oversight for the governance of clearinghouses. We also invite comment on certain future rulemaking for best practices, and I look forward to future consideration of the additional opportunities for the Commission to promote transparency, accountability, predictability, and effective oversight. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldsmith Romero. Seeing that she's done with her comments and questions, I'm now turn to Commissioner Mersinger for any comments and questions.
Thank you, Chair Behnam. And I don't have any questions. I was lucky enough to have a preview of this earlier in my time here at the CFTC, and certainly something that I've continued to look at and consider over the last few months. And I will say one of the special characteristics here of the CFTC is the level of engagement and expertise of the advisory committees, which market participants and other interested parties come together to provide us with their perspectives and potential solutions for practical problems. I've witnessed this firsthand as I served as a designated federal officer for the Agriculture Advisory Committee, and also in working for former Commissioner Stump and her sponsorship of the GMAC. Or the Global Markets Advisory Committee. And I've attended a number of advisory committee meetings over the last few years. Today's proposed derivatives clearing organization governance regulations, we all know, were born out of the Market Risk Advisory Committee's Central Counterparty Risk and Governance Subcommittee, which was adopted in February 2021. The extensive and thorough work done by the subcommittee in preparing this report and the recommendations is certainly something that we're very grateful for here. Want to thank the members and the staff of the MRAC. But I also want to take a moment and thank the chairman for his leadership as sponsor of the MRAC. Honestly, the accomplishments that have stemmed from the diligence and cooperation of the members of the MRAC under Chairman Behnam sponsorship are numerous, and I think they serve as an example to the new commissioners, including myself, of how to effectively engage with CFTC advisory committees to better our rulemaking agenda. So thank you, Chairman, for your leadership. And I'm also certain MRAC is in good hands with Commissioner Johnson as the new sponsor. So the proposed rules we are considering today obviously reflect some general agreement among the subcommittee members and build upon the report's specific recommendations regarding the establishment of the risk management committees and the risk advisory working groups. The core principles in the Commodity Exchange Act that a DCO must have a governance arrangement that are transparent in order to both fulfill public interest requirements and to permit the consideration of views of owners and participants are an important part of the CEA. The CFTC's regulations implementing this core principle set forth more detailed requirements regarding form and substance of DCO's governance arrangements. And the proposed rules we are considering today would enhance these regulations by requiring a DCO to establish one or more of the risk management committees and the RWGs, the risk management working groups. So the rules would require a DCO to maintain written policies and procedures regarding the establishments of the RMCs, the RMC consultation process, and the formation and role of each RWG would afford the DCO the flexibility on the specific contents of those policies and procedures. And I think this is an important piece of this proposal, that there is flexibility in these procedures, and that this rule not be too prescriptive. And I think that's something we need to think about as we move forward, and certainly as we're reviewing comments and come back to this proposal. As Commissioner Johnson mentioned, there are 15 registered DCOs today. My understanding is 12 of them already have risk management committees. 6 of them have the RWGs, and I think this codifies that practice, and certainly will hopefully encourage other DCOs and new registrants to also adopt these practices that are within the statutory core principle of DCO governance. I look forward to reviewing the comments on this proposal, and certainly I look forward to seeing what we get back on the many questions we're asking throughout this proposal. But again, I would encourage the Commission and maybe remind the Commission that we do want to include some flexibility here, and certainly don't want to be overly prescriptive in whatever final rule comes from this process. So just again, thank you to the members of the MRAC subcommittee. Thank you to the members of the MRAC, to Chairman Behnam, and certainly to the Division of Clearing and Risk for all your work on this proposal. But before I leave this topic, I did want to mention one other advisory committee and a comprehensive report that was prepared by the CFTC's Global Markets Advisory Committee, Subcommittee on Margin Requirements for Non-Cleared Swaps. This report included recommendations to tailor the Commission's uncleared margin rules for swap dealers to account for very real practical and operational challenges arising when they applied to the different sets of financial end users, such as pension plans, endowments, insurance providers, mortgage service providers. This group is now coming under the scope of the margin rules, phase 6. And from the GMAC subcommittee report, the Commission had promptly and unanimously adopted 4 of the GMAC report's recommendation. And most recently, the Commission included 2 more of these proposals in its agency's spring agency rule list. I know the GMAC members worked extraordinarily hard to reach consensus on these recommendations, and I would have liked to have seen those proposed rulemakings on today's agenda. And with that, I'll yield back my time.
Thanks, Commissioner Mersinger. Thanks for those comments, and certainly look forward to the work of this new commission and the advisory committees that you all sponsor now. So with that, turn over to Commissioner Pham for any comments or questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree wholeheartedly with the comments of my fellow Commissioner Mersinger, so I won't repeat them again. And in the interest of brevity, we'll keep both my comments as well as questions and responses to questions short. And thank you so much to the division for all of your hard work on this. This is an important issue with many different viewpoints, and as Commissioner Mersinger described, and under the leadership of Chairman Behnam and the new stewardship of Commissioner Johnson, I'm a strong proponent of public engagement, including through our advisory committees, and I appreciate that the MRAC's work included both DCOs, clearing members, and clients of clearing members in the discussion and the formulation of the recommendations. So I'll just touch briefly upon that. And please feel free to keep the answers short. Could you please describe all the recommendations from the MRAC subcommittee report beyond just the one that we're considering today, just sort of a high-level recap of the subcommittee report?
I think for the sake of diversity, I'm going to have some of the staff that's worked so hard on this answer the question. So in Chicago, we have Tad Polly and Joe O'Pronin. I'll leave it to you, Tad or Joe, to answer Commissioner Pham's questions, please. Joe.
Thanks, Clark. I'd be happy to.
Oh, either way, Joe.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, I'd say that.
Joe, take it.
Sorry about that. I'd say for the most part, the proposal tracks the subcommittee's recommendations. There are some differences. Most significantly, we added an explicit requirement that a DCO maintain written policies and procedures to make certain that the RMC consultation process is described in detail. It includes requirements for the DCO to document the board's consideration of and response to RMC input. Similarly, we added a requirement that the DCO maintain written policies and procedures related to the formation and role of each risk advisory working group. A couple of the proposals that Clark highlighted in his opening remarks, the DCOs and also the clearing member end users discussed at length a proposal to rethink how clearing member and end user input is considered in the rulemaking process. Ultimately, they didn't reach a consensus on that, and so that was left out, and it was not actually a recommendation in the report, but there was discussion surrounding it. I think that, otherwise, throughout the proposal, the edits that we made, to the text, were all generally aligned with the proposal by the subcommittee.
Great, thank you, Joe.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate being able to hear directly from the staff that work on the proposals, because I think it's really important. We recognize all of our staff, and I appreciate that. Besides the recommendations on DCO governance, which are included in the proposal, were there any other recommendations from the MRAC report that were not included in the proposal? Could be on different topics than DCO governance.
I think the answer to that's no.
Okay.
Short answer.
Great. So I know that. Please go ahead.
If I could. There are the way the report was laid out is that it began with the areas of agreement. It laid out how, areas where the kind of two sides reach consensus on how to approach something. But then there were several additional pages of the report after that that kind of separately laid out what the clearing member end users on one side and the DCOs on the other.
Tad, I'm sorry, but we're having some technical difficulties, so
That we're asking questions on.
I think we'll have to postpone. Do you want to try again, Tad?
Sorry.
We couldn't hear you.
Can you hear me?
We can now.
Oh, did it go out?
Yes.
Okay. Well, to say, I'm sorry, I don't know what you heard and what you didn't hear, so I'll try to give a short version. But the report contains a lot of recommendations that were only advocated by either the CCP side or the clearing member end user side, to be clear. So those are topics that, they did not reach agreement on how to approach a given topic, and these are the areas where we're generally asking questions to get additional input. So hope that made it through.
Yes, thanks so much. Well, so again, I think there's a lot of important viewpoints from the DCOs as well as from clearing members and from clients of clearing members. So I do welcome continued discussion on these points, including where there wasn't agreement, and I welcome commenters to additionally provide that information to the Commission as well on those other topics. Thank you so much. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thanks, Commissioner Pham. I want to thank all the commissioners for their engagement. We did reserve some time for a second round of questions, so I'm going to go back in order of seniority and just ask if you have questions. If you do, great. We're going to allow for 3 minutes for this second round. If you don't, then certainly we can just move on to the next individual. So I'll start with Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you so much, Chair Behnam. I don't have an additional question, just a comment that dovetails Commissioner Pham's line of questions. And I simply want to highlight that alongside the MRAC report that we're focused on for DCO governance, there were other MRAC reports contemporaneously prepared, perhaps more contentiously organized, or at least reflecting a broader diversity of strong views. And I just want to point out, for purposes of thinking carefully about risk management oversight, that in fact, one of my concerns is that we are comprehensive in our thoughtfulness around the types of issues that can come to materially affect the risk profile of a DCO and the role that those unresolved and maybe more difficult questions might continue to play even as we fix this piece of the puzzle, as we address this specific and particular concern. I know that it's something that you all, that DCR is thoughtful about, so I take that for granted, but think it's important to say it out loud on the record that these factors that are not immediately captured in this proposal have tremendous influence on the extent to which DCOs will successfully manage and mitigate risk.
Thanks, Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on the issue that in question that Commissioner Pham raised, that Commissioner Johnson just talked about as well. We have a full 5 of an independent commission, and so I hope that diversity of views on these other issues will just help rather than deter this independent commission with this fantastic staff of really trying to work through and develop long-lasting, strong rules that will strengthen the resilience of clearinghouses to future risk. I'm committed to working towards that and working with my fellow commissioners to see if we can move those things forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero. Commissioner Mersinger, any second round questions?
Just one quick follow-up question with regard to these rules that we are looking at today, or the proposal we're looking at today. In your opinion, is it better to keep these rules and proposals flexible and provide the DCOs and their market risk committees and their working groups the flexibility to really determine how to best proceed? Or is there room for some additional specific requirements? So kind of the idea of, should we look at this as we do a lot of things as principle-based and really let the those in the market, kind of decide what that means? Or is this something where we should really start to be prescriptive and direct the behavior of the DCOs and the market participants who are advising them on risk?
I think our view is a little bit of both. I think we put out a proposal today that asks questions that I think are important questions. And as you know, and as you do, we take feedback very seriously as a group, and we debate that feedback, and we debate it also in the context of practical implementation. If things are too hard to implement or too prescriptive, we get ourselves into a situation where people can't comply, or we cause a burden perhaps greater than the benefit we're trying to achieve. So I think we're very cognizant of not being too prescriptive, but at the same time, not being prescriptive has its downfalls as well. And so I know that sounds like middle ground, but I think that's where we are. We want to see what people have to say, and we want to be thoughtful about getting people to actually do some real work here, because it's been in conflict for years, and I think we want to settle that conflict and get some real results. But at the same time, as we've all noted, there are different models coming our way, and we have to be open enough and flexible enough to accommodate those models within a prescription. But at the end of the day, I have to say, I try to follow maxims, and I think we would all agree, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I think what we're trying to do is come up with what the ounces of prevention look like so we don't have to deal with a pound of cure later.
Thank you. And I would just add that, in moving through this process, I do think this is the first step, and there's probably more that we can do here. But with regards to this specific proposal, I think it's important that we remember that any further additions or edits or changes to the proposal should be carefully thought through, reflecting public comments, and not go too far-fledged from what we are putting out there today. With that, I'll yield back my time.
Thanks, Commissioner Mersinger. And any second round questions from Commissioner Pham?
Thank you. I'll just make one more comment, and that is that the CFTC is not only internationally recognized as a leader, but also as the premier clearinghouse regulator. And so I really want to commend not only the staff for all of their work, but also in the Congress in putting together that regulatory framework in the Commodity Exchange Act, and that our principles-based regulation has stood the test of time. And with our leadership in regulating clearinghouses, I think that it's important that we understand and have shown with the track record of what works. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Commissioner Pham. Having heard from each of the commissioners, if there is no further discussion or debate, we'll proceed to a vote on the pending motion to approve and issue the notice of proposed rulemaking on governance requirements for derivatives clearing organizations as presented in the voting draft. Are the commissioners prepared to vote? Okay, as it appears, commission is ready to vote. Mr. Kirkpatrick, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The motion now before the Commission is on the approval and issuance of the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking on Governance Requirements for Derivatives Clearing Organizations as presented in the voting draft circulated to the Commissioners. Commissioner Pham?
Yes.
Commissioner Pham votes yes. Commissioner Mersinger?
Yes.
Commissioner Mersinger votes yes. Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero?
Yes.
Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero votes yes. Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson votes aye. Chairman Behnam?
Aye.
Chairman Behnam votes aye. Mr. Chairman, on this matter, the ayes have 5, the noes have 0.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkpatrick. The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the notice of proposed rulemaking on governance requirements for derivatives clearing organizations is approved to be issued by the Commission. So with that, I'd like to say final thanks to Clark, to Eileen, to Tad, and to Joe in Chicago. Thanks for joining us despite some technical difficulties, but I think we did a great job. Thanks for all your work. Important issue. Look forward to the comments and moving forward on this proposal. To continue with our agenda today, I'd like now to invite staff from the Market Participants Division to make a presentation on the notice of proposed order and request for comment on an application for a capital comparability determination submitted by the Financial Services Agency of Japan. Okay, welcome to staff. I'm going to just identify who we have here with us today. First, Amanda O'Lear, Director of the Market Participants Division. Tom Smith, Deputy Director of the Financial Requirements Branch in MPD, Josh Beal, an Associate Director in the Financial Requirements Branch in MPD, and Rob Schwartz, the agency's General Counsel. So with that, Ms. O'Lear, please proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Behnam and Commissioners. Just echoing the comments that were made by my predecessor at this seat, Clark Hutchison, it is my great honor and privilege to participate in today's historic meeting. It is my first open meeting as a division director, so thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm joined at the table today by my colleagues Tom Smith, Deputy Director, and Josh Beal, Associate Director of the Financial Requirements Branch of the Market Participants Division. I would also like to introduce two additional Financial Requirements Branch staff members who are with us today, Ju Hong and Justin McPhee. Ju and Justin are sitting in the front row behind me and are available to assist with responding to your questions if necessary. Additionally, we are joined remotely by Natalie Markman Radhakrishnan, who is available to respond to any questions that might benefit from the expertise of the Office of International Affairs. Today, MPD is recommending that the Commission approve for public comment a proposed capital comparability determination and related order, preliminarily finding that Japanese non-bank swap dealers that are registered with the Financial Services Agency of Japan may, subject to proposed conditions set forth in the proposed order, satisfy certain CFTC capital and financial reporting requirements by complying with comparable Japanese laws and regulations. As we will discuss during the presentation, the assessment of the comparability of the swap dealer capital and financial reporting requirements of Japan with those of the Commission involves substantial MPD staff resources. In this regard, I wish to acknowledge the efforts of Rafael Martinez, Ju Hong, Justin McPhee, Jennifer Bauer, Larry Eckert, Carmen Moncada-Terry, and Lily Bozanova, in addition to those of Josh and Tom. I would also like to acknowledge the contributions provided by my colleagues in the legal division, including Rob Schwartz, Carlene Kim, Paul Schlichting, Mark Pfeiffer, and Jeanette Curtis, as well as the assistance provided by the Office of International Affairs, Suyash Paliwal, Mauricio Malara, Natalie Markman Radhakrishnan, and Lily Chu. I would further like to thank the commissioners and their staffs for your engagement with MPD on this matter, including your constructive comments and feedback on the proposed determination. I will now turn the presentation over to Josh Beal, who will present to you the proposed capital comparability determination for Japan.
Thank you, Amanda. Chairman Behnam, Commissioners. MPD staff recommends that the Commission approve for public comment a proposed capital comparability determination and related order. The proposed determination and order would find that the CFTC registered swap dealers that are both domiciled in Japan and licensed as financial instruments business operators with the Financial Services Agency of Japan, the FSA, may comply with capital and financial reporting requirements under Japanese laws and regulations in lieu of the Commission's swap dealer capital and financial reporting requirements. To put this determination into context, I'll provide some background. The Dodd-Frank Act directs the Commission and U.S. banking regulators to impose capital requirements on entities registered with the Commission as swap dealers, and further directs the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, and U.S. banking regulators to impose capital requirements on entities registered with the SEC as security-based swap dealers. In summary, the Commission and SEC have jurisdiction to impose capital requirements over swap dealers and security-based swap dealers that are not subject to regulation by a U.S. banking regulator, which we refer to as non-bank swap dealers or non-bank security-based swap dealers, respectively. While U.S. banking regulators have authority to impose capital requirements over entities that are subject to their regulation, which we refer to as bank swap dealers and bank security-based swap dealers. Pursuant to the Dodd-Frank Act, the Commission, SEC, and U.S. banking regulators were further directed to consult with respect to the development of minimum capital requirements for swap dealers and security-based swap dealers, and to the maximum extent practicable, establish and maintain comparable minimum requirements. The Dodd-Frank Act further added Section 4SF to the Commodity Exchange Act, which authorizes the Commission to impose financial condition reporting requirements on all registered swap dealers, including swap dealers subject to the capital requirements of a U.S. banking regulator or bank swap dealer. After extensive consultation with the SEC and U.S. banking regulators, the Commission adopted capital and financial reporting rules for swap dealers. The final rules were published in the Federal Register in September of 2020 with an effective date of October 6, 2021. Regulation 23.101 of the final capital rules permits a non-bank swap dealer to elect one of three capital regimes. The first, the net liquid asset approach, which provides that a swap dealer shall compute its capital as if the firm were an SEC-registered security-based swap dealer. A second, the bank-based approach, which provides that a swap dealer shall compute its capital as if the firm were a bank holding company, subject to the capital rules of the Federal Reserve Board. And third, the tangible net worth approach, which requires a swap dealer to have a defined amount of tangible net worth. Tangible net worth is only available to swap dealers that are themselves or whose parent is primarily engaged in commercial activities. The Commission adopted a rule providing flexibility for swap dealers to elect a capital approach in recognition of the broad spectrum of entities registered as swap dealers with the Commission. Specifically, the Commission determined that mandating a single capital approach would not be appropriate given the diverse range of corporate entities registered as swap dealers, which include agricultural firms, energy companies, international financial institutions, and relatively small financial firms. The flexibility provided by the Commission's rule also is consistent with the Dodd-Frank Act's direction that the Commission, the SEC, and U.S. banking regulators should, to the maximum extent practicable, establish and maintain comparable minimum capital requirements. In this connection, the net liquid asset approach allows entities that are duly registered as security-based swap dealers with the SEC and swap dealers with the CFTC to use a single uniform approach to computing their regulatory capital, which would simplify their regulatory obligations to both the CFTC and SEC. The net liquid asset approach requires a swap dealer to hold a sufficient level of liquid assets to meet all of its obligations to customers, counterparties, and creditors. In addition, the bank-based approach, which is important for this presentation, is based on the Federal Reserve Board's capital rules for establishing safety and soundness of banking entities, and is generally consistent with the international bank capital standards adopted by the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. A further benefit of adopting the bank-based approach is that many of the domestic and foreign non-bank swap dealers are non-bank subsidiaries of bank holding companies and compute regulatory capital in accordance with Basel-based bank capital requirements. In addition, the final rules adopted by the Commission included several important financial reporting rules, which included various monthly and annual financial reports to be furnished by swap dealers to the Commission. The final rules also included specific record keeping and typical notification requirements regarding the firm's capital and financial position that the Commission similarly collects from other registered intermediaries. In adopting the Commission's final rules, the Commission also recognized that a substantial number of non-bank swap dealers were domiciled in foreign jurisdictions and already subject to home country capital and financial reporting requirements. To address potential dual regulation, the Commission adopted Regulation 23.106, which provides a system of substituted compliance. That regulation provides a mechanism whereby non-U.S. non-bank swap dealers may comply with home country capital and financial reporting requirements in lieu of the Commission's requirements, provided that the Commission finds that the foreign rules are comparable to the Commission's rules and are intended to ensure the safety and soundness of the dealer. Regulation 23.106 provides that either a non-U.S. swap dealer, a foreign regulatory authority with jurisdiction over a non-U.S. swap dealer, or a trade association representing one or more of non-U.S. swap dealers may submit an application to the Commission requesting a capital comparability determination and order that would allow the non-U.S. swap dealers to comply with home country capital and financial reporting requirements in lieu of all or some of the Commission's respective requirements. Regulation 23.106 further provides that an application for a capital comparability determination must include at least three things. The first, a description of the objectives of the relevant foreign jurisdiction's capital adequacy and financial reporting requirements. Second, a description of how that relevant foreign jurisdiction's requirements address the elements of the Commission's respective requirements, including whether the foreign jurisdiction's capital rules are consistent with the international standards, such as Basel Bank Capital Standards. And finally, third, a description of the ability of the relevant foreign regulatory authority or authorities to supervise and enforce with that jurisdiction's requirements. Regulation 23.106 also provides that the Commission will issue a capital comparability determination to the extent that it finds that some or all of the relevant foreign jurisdictions' capital adequacy and financial reporting requirements for non-U.S. swap dealers are comparable to the Commission's corresponding requirements. In determining whether a foreign jurisdiction's capital requirements are comparable, the Commission may consider all relevant factors, including the scope and objectives of the foreign jurisdiction's capital adequacy and financial reporting requirements, whether the relevant foreign jurisdiction's capital adequacy and financial reporting requirements achieve comparable outcomes to the Commission's corresponding requirements for swap dealers and major swap participants, the ability of the relevant regulatory authority or authorities to supervise and enforce compliance with the foreign jurisdiction's capital adequacy and financial reporting requirements, and any other factors or circumstances that the Commission deems relevant. Regulation 23.106 also provides that notwithstanding the Commission issuing a determination, foreign swap dealers remain subject to the Commission examination and enforcement authority. With respect to Japan, the FSA filed an application on behalf of 3 non-bank swap dealers that are registered with the FSA as Type 1 financial instrument business operators. The application addresses the comparability of each element of the Commission's bank-based approach rules and financial reporting rules to Japanese requirements, with citations to relevant Japanese laws and regulations. The FSA application requested a finding of comparability specifically with respect to the Commission's bank-based approach. With respect to MPD's process of reviewing the application, staff initially requested the FSA to complete a chart mapping the Commission's bank-based capital requirements and financial reporting requirements to the Japanese laws and regulations. MPD staff also requested the FSA to provide English language translations of the relevant Japanese laws and regulations cited in the application. MPD staff then reviewed the Japanese laws and regulations and mapped them to the FSA application. MPD and OIA staff also held several calls with FSA staff to discuss the application, and MPD requested written responses to various questions. Based upon MPD's analysis, which I'll speak to briefly in a minute, staff prepared a draft capital comparability determination and order, preliminary finding the Japanese capital and financial reporting rules comparable to the CFTC capital and financial reporting rules, subject to certain conditions. The draft determination and order were provided to the FSA for the purpose of reviewing the factual accuracy of MPD's description of Japanese regulatory requirements and citations to Japanese laws and regulations. In addition, staff consulted with the U.S. banking regulators, including the Fed, the FDIC, and OCC, as well as with the SEC. With respect to MPD's analysis, staff performed a holistic assessment of whether Japanese Basel-based capital and financial reporting requirements are comparable to the Commission's capital and financial reporting requirements. That assessment is reflected in the voting draft before you today, and to briefly summarize, preliminarily finds the following. First, the fundamental capital structure and requirements of Japan and the Commission's bank-based capital approach are comparable, and both are rooted in the Basel Bank capital requirements. Specifically, Both the Japanese and Commission's capital requirements are structured to require a swap dealer to maintain an appropriate ratio of qualifying capital to its risk-weighted assets. Second, both the Japanese and CFTC capital rules limit qualifying capital to capital that generally represents permanent equity of the firm and to subordinated debt where the debt holders subordinate their claims to repayment to the claims of all other creditors. And finally, both Japanese and CFTC's frameworks provide the respective relevant regulatory authorities with the appropriate information to adequately supervise and enforce the respective capital and financial reporting requirements. While the proposed determination contains a preliminary finding that the two regimes are comparable, the proposed determination also includes certain important conditions. In this regard, the proposed determination includes several conditions with respect to reporting, including requirements for Japanese non-bank swap dealers to provide the Commission and NFA monthly and annual financial reports, regulatory notices of decreases in capital, and notice of a violation of home country capital requirements. The conditions requiring certain financial reporting are necessary to allow the Commission and NFA to monitor the Japanese non-bank swap dealers' ongoing compliance with home country requirements. The proposed conditions are intended to strike an appropriate balance between accepting home country financial reporting while also ensuring that the information received is adequate and timely for CFTC and NFA staff to properly monitor the capital condition of non-bank swap dealers. The proposed preliminary determination also requests comment on several specific questions with respect to the timing of the filing of regulatory notices and financial reporting by Japanese non-bank swap dealers, and on the question of whether the Japanese capital rules adequately address operational and other risks without a provision requiring Japanese swap dealer to maintain a level of capital equal to or greater than 8% of the firm's uncleared swap margin. Staff recommends that the Commission approve the proposed determination and order for public comment with a 60-day comment period. Thank you, and we are happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Josh. And to Amanda's point, I do want to recognize both Ju and Justin, who are sitting behind the head table, and all the work. Amanda, you named a number of divisions and a number of individuals, and I think that's just a testament to both the complexity of our markets, who we engage with both here domestically. Josh mentioned conversations that have happened with domestic regulators, but also international regulators, obviously, with the Japanese FSA. But this is a terribly complex issue that requires a lot of hands and expertise. And I do want to recognize all the staff here at the CFTC and, of course, support that we've gotten from our colleagues here within the U.S. Government regulatory structure, but also folks overseas. So, Amanda, thanks for recognizing those individuals. I think it's extremely important. So with that, the Commission will consider and vote upon each of the proposed comparability determinations and requests for comment individually. To formally open the Commission's discussion and consideration of the first of those matters, I'll now entertain a motion for the approval and issuance of notice of proposal, order, and request for comment on an application for a capital comparability determination submitted by the Financial Services Agency of Japan as presented in the voting draft circulated to the Commission.
So moved.
Seconded.
Thank you. So with that, the floor is now open for the Commission's deliberations on this matter. And as we did before with the DCO governance rule, I will take a moment to make a short statement and then maybe ask a few questions of staff. And then I will turn it to Commissioner Johnson and our colleagues to do the same. So, of course, turning to another important matter here this morning, as CFTC provisionally registered swap dealers operate and manage risk globally, the Commission's supervisory framework must acknowledge the realities of multi-jurisdictional operations. I support the Commission's proposed order and request for comment on its preliminary determination that non-bank swap dealers organized and domiciled in Japan are subject to and comply with capital and financial reporting requirements in Japan that are comparable to certain capital and financial reporting requirements under the Commodity Exchange Act and the Commission's regulations subject to certain conditions. Today's preliminary capital comparability determination is the first such order proposed by the Commission since adopting its regulatory substituted compliance framework for non-U.S. domiciled non-bank swap dealers in July of 2020. The Commission is proposing this order in response to an application submitted by the Financial Services Agency of Japan, which has direct supervisory authority over the 3 Japanese non-bank swap dealers that are provisionally registered with the Commission. The Commission's principles-based approach to the proposed determination focuses on whether the FSA's capital and financial reporting requirements achieve comparable outcomes to the corresponding CFTC requirements. Specifically, the Commission has also considered the scope and objectives of FSA's capital adequacy and financial reporting requirements, the ability of FSA to supervise and enforce compliance with its capital and financial reporting requirements, and other facts or circumstances the Commission has deemed relevant for this particular application. Throughout its analysis, the Commission recognized that jurisdictions may adopt unique approaches to achieving comparable outcomes, and the Commission has focused on how the FSA's capital and financial reporting requirements are comparable to its own in purpose and effect, rather than whether each are comparable in every particular aspect or contain identical elements. In this regard, the approach was not a line-by-line assessment or comparison of FSA's regulatory requirements with the Commission's own requirements. Consistent with the Commission's authority to issue a capital comparability determination with terms and conditions it deems appropriate, today's proposed order contains 22 conditions. These conditions aim to ensure that the proposed order, if it's finalized, would only apply to Japanese non-bank swap dealers that are eligible for substituted compliance, and that these Japanese non-bank swap dealers comply with FSA's capital and financial reporting requirements, as well as certain additional capital, margin, position, and financial reporting, record keeping, and regulatory notice requirements. If the Commission, upon consideration of the comments received, determines to issue a favorable comparability determination, an eligible Japanese non-bank swap dealer would be required to file a notice of its intent to comply with FSA's capital adequacy and financial reporting rules in lieu of the Commission's requirements. The Commission or the Market Participants Division through delegated authority would then be obligated to confirm to the Japanese non-bank swap dealer that it may comply with the foreign jurisdiction's rules, as well as any conditions that would be adopted as a part of the final determination. And that by doing so, it would be deemed to be in compliance with the CFTC's corresponding capital adequacy and financial reporting requirements. I believe it's important to note that today's proposed capital comparability determination, if it's finalized, would not compromise the Commission's capital and financial reporting requirements. Instead, it recognizes the global nature of the swaps market with duly registered swap dealers that operate in multiple jurisdictions that mandate prudent capital and financial reporting requirements. A capital and financial reporting comparability determination order of this kind is not a compromise or a deference to a foreign regulatory authority. The Commission would retain its enforcement authority and examinations authority, as well as obtain all financial and event-specific reporting to maintain direct oversight over non-bank swap dealers located in Japan. While the CFTC and the FSA have a pre-existing memorandum of understanding in place, I also believe it's important to note that an MOU or a similar agreement is not necessary for the Commission and the National Futures Association to monitor these firms' compliance with the conditions of a capital comparability determination. I look forward to the public submission of comments and feedbacks on this proposed determination and order. And looking beyond the proposed Japan capital comparability determination on the Commission's agenda today, the Commission will consider the proposed capital comparability determination for non-bank swap dealers domiciled in Mexico, which we initially noticed last week, at a future date to allow for additional dialogue between CFTC staff and our international counterparts. Separately, to address additional similarly situated non-bank swap dealers that are not organized or domiciled in Japan, the Market Participants Division is actively considering whether to renew its no-action position in No Action Letter 2120, which currently expires on October 6, 2022. MPD hopes to provide certainty to provisionally registered non-bank swap dealers located in the 4 jurisdictions with a capital comparability determination that is under active consideration by the Commission as soon as practicable. Again, thank you to the staff for the excellent presentation, all the work that has went into this. again, understanding the complexity and the intersection of so many different divisions and agencies. It's certainly no easy task. If you don't mind, a few questions, and I think, Josh, you pointed out a lot of very important things in a very structured way about what we do and how we get to where we are today in terms of our relationship with foreign regulators, and this idea of an outcomes-based approach, and not, as I pointed out in my statement, necessarily focusing on the particular specifics of a rule requirement, less prescriptive and more principles-based. I think it would be helpful if you could explain, in your experience with conversations and understanding different laws and rules and regulations, why is that the best approach? Why is that really, in many respects, the only appropriate approach to affect what we're trying to accomplish as an agency vis-a-vis our foreign counterparts? But also, if we think about our markets as global markets, what would it fundamentally be if we were more prescriptive in saying, the side-by-side of check, 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 as opposed to what we do to accomplish what, ultimately is our goal of an outcomes-based approach in comparability between us and our partners overseas?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. That's a very important question. I think I would answer it in a couple of different ways and then turn to some of my colleagues if they have any of their thoughts. First, it's important to note that, in the United States, the CFTC has a very targeted mission with respect to adopting capital requirements over these swap dealers. In other jurisdictions, there is important capital requirements built, but there aren't things necessarily as swap dealers recognized in other jurisdictions. And the same entities that we're talking about here wear many different hats in foreign jurisdictions, and therefore the regulatory environment by their home country is very different. And the capital requirements, which are entity-specific, go towards all types of activities that they might be engaged in from a regulatory capacity. And it's important to understand that, because when you talk about comparing line by line and getting into capital can get very weedy and very specific to different types of activities, of how the firms account for it and how that is reflected in the capital requirements. And when other jurisdictions approach their mandate in slightly different ways, you end up with you can get lost in the details of how they do that. And it's very important that this approach, specifically with respect to capital, remain at that level for that reason. And I'll turn to Tom if he wants to offer anything else.
Thank you, Josh. Mr. Chairman, it's a good question. And I think from the starting perspective, we look at the international swap dealers that we're dealing with. Most of them are in a Basel-based regime. That's what we've seen so far is that's this sort of standard of what their capital is. Now, Basel is a framework, and that framework has to be implemented by national authorities, and they make adjustments to Basel to fit their own specific purposes and needs. We in the CFTC are looking at the Fed's Basel-based rules for our bank-based approach, but even the Commission in going final made certain adjustments to that Basel-based approach. So lining them up sort of side by side, it'd be very difficult to have complete uniformity. They're consistent with respect to the principle, the objective, and what they're accomplishing, but they have slight differences to reflect national interest, experiences, et cetera. That's why I think it doesn't work to have just a pure line-by-line assessment.
Thanks, Tom, and to Josh as well. I think that's just so important for the public to hear, because I think it's easy to get lost in a narrative that we're just looking at things from too high of a level. But in fact, in some respects we are getting in the weeds, but in some respects it really doesn't make sense, and it would be counterintuitive to what we're trying to accomplish. And this is not even suggesting cultural differences, language differences, and many other challenges that you all face in terms of debates and discussions with our counterparts overseas. And I do want to recognize the accomplishment that this team largely achieved in the recent past with the capital rule. This is really an offshoot of that success, which took many years, but I think in the end landed in a very good spot. So really thank you to the team for all the work and the success that's gotten us to here, and the first of many steps, I think, in terms of comparability determinations. One last question, and Josh, you mentioned this in your statement as well, about the conditions that we require above and beyond what these non-bank swap dealers are required to comply with in their home country jurisdiction. You mentioned, monthly or annual notices, the idea of ongoing monitoring of the entities so that we know they're in compliance with what we initially agreed to and what we're considering here today as a proposal. Again, another issue I think that's extremely important for the public to hear and for us to sort of more unpack in a more simple way, but just in many respects repeat what you said, I think, but perhaps in a different way, why we require these additional conditions, what purpose they serve, and really it supports the longevity of the relationship and the agreement we make today, and hopefully to in the future when we finalize this rule, because ultimately regulatory environments change, markets evolve, markets adapt. We all know that here. And we collectively have to make sure that the agreements that we sort of solidify in time adapt and evolve with those changes in market structure. So maybe just some comments on how you landed on those certain conditions, how they've worked in the past, and really ultimately, to the extent there's anything else you'd want to share, what the goal is in requiring those conditions.
Right. So the financial reporting, many of the conditions, as I noted in the introductory remarks, go towards financial reporting, and that is particularly one of the more challenging areas to really reconcile and get right. It is the activity in which the dealers engage with the Commission and the NFA on a monthly basis, and obtaining the important information that we need for oversight purposes to make sure that those non-bank swap dealers remain in capital compliance, even with their home country. We obtain those reports from the FSA that they are receiving, and we match those up to similar requirements that we have and reports that have been adopted as an offshoot of the swap dealer capital rule. And the conditions reflect the important components that we think are necessary to achieve that ongoing surveillance. And there is several questions, which I will note in the release, that ask about striking that balance. And we hope that this will continue to be an important dialogue going forward. But the reconciliation, if you will, that we have performed finds itself in those conditions. And we think that those are the ones that are absolutely necessary for us to compare those swap dealers' positions, particularly with existing reports that we're receiving from domestic swap dealers, and continue that surveillance and continue that understanding of how the effect of the capital rule has on all of the registered swap dealers.
Thanks, Josh. Just an extremely important point, and I think, again, a testament to some of the very unique expertise we have here at the agency and unique markets that we have and how we have to deal with the international component and many different differences in terms of making sure markets run well, are resilient, and are fighting financial stability issues, but also are operating in an efficient way. So again, thanks to the entire team at the table, behind, and all those who contributed to this proposal. I will now ask Commissioner Johnson for any statements or questions.
Thanks so much, Chair Behnam. Thank you so much for this presentation. I just want to layer in one small piece to Amanda's thanks. Actually, Amanda, I just note that your exemplary thoughtfulness about each and every individual who contributed to this particular matter is really fantastic. So thank you for that thoughtfulness. I'm just going to underscore and acknowledge Rafael Martinez because he happily called my office while away on vacation in Hawaii with his family to discuss these matters in great detail at an hour in the morning in Hawaii that I can only imagine was fairly awful. So quite the testament to the commitment that this division and all staff for the CFTC have to executing their duties to the highest of their abilities, and even while on vacation with their family in Hawaii. So thank you so much, Amanda, to you and your team. At the heart of this discussion, to Chairman Behnam's last point and to his exchange and colloquy with Josh, is this concern that arises out of our experiences with undercapitalization and the consequences of undercapitalization. We can reflect back, as we've talked about across the dais today, on the events that led us to a place that we began to develop the rules and began down the road of establishing obligations at the outset for domestic even swap dealers to be effectively or sufficiently capitalized. I want to just take a little bit of a step back and review for purposes of our conversation here and also just some table setting for those who are joining us and may not have as much familiarity with the process. And we talked a little bit about this in the extensive conversations that we had that you all have engaged in. You also sort of reflected on this in your colloquy with the chair. Specifically, I'm thoughtful about information sharing arrangements and enforcement arrangements and supervisory memoranda of understanding as just a foundational point for the conversations that have been had here. Can you comment on the extent to which this effort that we have today before us, the matter before us as it is articulated in the notice, is the result of those types of conversations and dialogue? And part of the reason I ask that question is I have some specific follow-on that I'm just curious to know how we'll navigate going forward. So I'm not sure, Amanda, who the best person would be to just share a brief background of the collection of agreements that we might have in place with the jurisdiction on a matter like capital comparability.
This might be something that Natalie might be able to assist us with.
I think that's, yeah.
Because Natalie is our point person with respect to MOU negotiations.
Welcome, Natalie.
Hi, good morning. I'm not sure if you can hear or see me. My screen has gone entirely dark, so if you could let me know that you can hear and see me, that would be helpful.
We see you, you look lovely, and we hear you clearly.
Well, thank you for that. I unfortunately am not in Hawaii, but I am dialing in remote, and I'd like to thank our tech folks for helping me do so. With respect to the question of supervisory arrangements generally, I would say that with a number of jurisdictions, we do have memoranda of understanding that cover swap dealers. We've got arrangements with authorities in Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, Italy, Japan, Singapore, and the United Kingdom. With respect to Japan, we negotiated and signed in March 2014 a supervisory arrangement with the JFSA, which I think has formed the foundation for the ability of our staff in the Market Participants Division and Office of International Affairs to have what hopefully have been very helpful conversations about this particular proposal. We have the ability, to go further than that with respect to the supervision of swap dealers. Arrangements provide for such things as, expectations on cooperation, a mechanism for requesting information, safeguards for protecting non-public information, and also sort of a protocol or a process for conducting on-site visits where necessary. So on the supervisory side, that's sort of the general picture. And then I would add also a number of market authorities are signatories to the IOSCO multilateral memorandum of understanding. Now that would cover cooperation that is sort of in an investigatory or more of an enforcement related mode. And so the JFSA and CFTC are our signatories to the IOSCO MMOU as well.
Thanks, Natalie. That's really helpful. I think in setting the stage and being exceptionally clear about something that the chair highlighted in his comments, that we are not deferring or giving up our authority and ability to engage in examinations or exercise oversight. In fact, we are partnering with and cooperating with jurisdictions around the world to ensure the soundness, safety, soundness, and integrity of global financial markets. To that point, however, there are places where there is divergence between what we're asking and what would be required under the local jurisdiction in this context. So specifically, I'm just curious to talk a little bit about notices, in particular the obligation that they be written in English and delivered within a particular window of time. I'm thoughtful that what's described in the documents before us really calls for comment rather than resolves each of those individual issues. But for these types of concerns, in particular, again, I'll focus in on the monthly reports. I'm curious to know what you anticipate to be the likely response from the community in terms of the ability of relevant swap dealers to respond as described in the order or pursuant to what we likely anticipate might be in the final order, and whether or not the timing mechanisms there are reasonable, rational, and consistent, first with what could be delivered, but then also with what might be critical in the event of some type of crisis.
Commissioner, I'll start the conversation on our side. So with respect to financial statements, I think we break this into a couple of sections, but with respect to the pure financial statements, and there we're talking about the balance sheet, income statement, et cetera, what the proposal does is accepts the types of financial statements and reporting that is done by the swap dealer with the FSA. As you pointed out, the only difference is that we have asked that they be provided to us in English so we can understand them and read them, and have balances converted to US dollars so we can monitor that. But we are accepting copies effectively of what is filed with the JFSA. In addition, under the proposal, there's a 15-day additional period of time provided to the entity to do that translation for us and to do the conversion. I don't think this would be a substantial issue with the entities. This concept has been sort of informally discussed, certainly discussed in detail with the JFSA, but also stepping back, part of our original process of this when the rule became final was to deal with U.S. firms that have foreign affiliates. So most of, I think Commissioner Pham mentioned earlier today that many of the non-U.S. entities are part of U.S. companies. So we've had informal sort of discussions with the large investment firms that are swap dealer registrants that have foreign affiliates. They understand the process that we have with respect to reporting, and they certainly understood that our desire would be to have those documents in English so that we could read them. Because we are, in effect, deferring with respect to the rule in that they can meet the Japanese requirements in lieu of our requirements, but we still are monitoring because of their registration status with us and their involvement in the U.S. marketplace. We are not sort of deferring wholesale the monitoring of the entity to Japan. We are still monitoring their condition. We are also recognizing and will in developing the oversight program that there is a home country regulator that will factor into our scope and our frequency of review, et cetera, that staff will do. Now, turning to the notices, that was an area where we identified certain missing items, if you will, that they did not have a comparable sort of notice that we expect and have in our rules for swap dealers and for FCMs. And generally, these are referred to as early warning notices, and they're intended to put staff on alert. And this is why they're important. They put us on alert of not an under-capital position necessarily, but a potential that something is going on. They've had a reduction in the amount of capital they have. They've gone under the early warning level of capital. They're not in violation yet. They could be in violation, that's another notice, but the intent of these notices is to provide us with an opportunity to identify potential issues, to engage with the firm directly or engage with a foreign regulator to understand what possibly is happening with that firm and if there is any market risk to that event. So those are the ones that we specifically identified, and some are just copies again too. So I should back up just a second and say, like, if they filed a notice with their home country regulator regarding being undercapitalized in Japan, it's 120 and 140% of the minimum requirement. They would alert us to that fact. We then, on top of that, said, well, if you're also in violation of the Japanese rules, you notify us, and that's the purpose of those notices. And you're correct. We've asked a specific question on both financial reporting and on notices as to whether the time frame that we've established is sufficient. I will note that one or two of the notices require notice within 24 hours of the event. In the response to a commissioner's comment or question of us, we recognize that, yes, time zone difference and other things, it might be appropriate to at least ask the question about that as to whether that provides adequate time for the translation to be done and the issue to be addressed.
And they're just following up really quickly. Thanks so much for that. I just want to follow up quickly and here with the notices, also written notice in English. I think specifically you're referring to the 24-hour obligation possibly to report, deliver a notice because of the occurrence of a reportable event. And presumptively, again, that's written and in English, maybe taking into account some time zone differences is what you likely anticipate will surface there. Is that right?
Yeah, we expect that we will get comment on that point. That's right.
Okay. And one last really quick question about accounting standards. So audited financials, in this context, we're referring to financials that have been audited according to GAAP standards or IFRS. Is that correct?
With respect to the substituted compliance, the U.S. requirement is GAAP or IFRS. The determination would accept in accordance with Japanese accounting standards. There, we look at this and you say, there's two sort of accounting regimes that are relevant in this discussion. One is the financial reporting requirements or GAAP of Japan for the purposes of producing their final financial statements and annual report. There's also regulatory accounting required, and that's where we're looking at the capital levels, and that's based on the Japanese regime for Basel. So we're looking at their ratio of capital to risk-weighted assets. That's not really driven by accounting principles. It's driven by a regulatory accounting standard and the Basel standards. So it does provide flexibility that we can read the Japanese financial statements prepared in accordance with their standards, but we also have the regulatory components.
Thanks so much, Tom. That was an exceptionally fulsome answer. I appreciate that. Chair, I yield the remainder of my time.
Thanks, Commissioner Johnson. And turning to Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero for any statement or questions.
Thank you, Chairman. This was just terrific. What's happened today reflects what has been happening over the last couple of weeks. And this is just a wonderful team that has been so thoughtful, so engaged, and I've really enjoyed the dialogue we've had on this. These are important matters that you care about a lot about, I care a lot about, we all care a lot about, and you've done just a very thorough job in going through all of it and then making sure that we as commissioners truly understand not just the rules, but how you look at them and then the reality of what you go through in trying to make these determinations. And I'm very grateful for that, and I recognize how hard you've worked. Very thoughtful presentation, and there were a number of questions and comments that I had that, again, are contained in the proposal after we had this discussions, and I'm really grateful for that. So I'm going to give my statement. I have a couple questions, although some of them were just answered, I believe, and some of them are things we've discussed before. So let me give my statement first. I support the Commission's efforts for strong capital requirements and financial reporting to help ensure the safety and soundness of swap dealers whose activities could affect U.S. markets, including through the proposal today for Japan. The proposal promotes financial stability and the benefits of global harmonization with a like-minded regulator for the global swaps markets. So thank you to the staff for your hard work on the proposal and your thoughtful engagement with me and my office on changes to improve the proposal. A key cause of the 2008 financial crisis was the failure of bank regulators to require financial institutions, including those who were swap dealers, to have enough high-quality capital to serve as a buffer against risk and absorb losses. The devastating result of this undercapitalization swept rapidly through the highly interconnected financial system. The default or margin failure of one counterparty triggered another, and then another, which led to a short-term liquidity crisis. Risk and losses cascaded from subsidiaries and affiliates to bank parent or bank holding companies, including across borders. The financial contagion, as we know, was not limited to major players in the markets. The entire economy suffered, with Main Street bearing the consequences of Wall Street. And then the federal government made unprecedented capital injections of hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars into more than 700 financial institutions through the Troubled Asset Relief Program known as TARP. For the last decade, I have served as the Special Inspector General for TARP, known as SIGTARP, providing oversight over TARP. I have testified before Congress and reported publicly on lessons learned from inadequate capital requirements pre-crisis and the need for strong levels of high-quality capital to lower systemic risk in the financial system. Swap dealer capital requirements are one of the most critical reforms in the Dodd-Frank Act for derivatives markets. These reforms led the CFTC to have strong minimum capital requirements, including allowing non-bank swap dealers to use a capital framework similar to what banking regulators applied to banks, aimed at safety and soundness and consistent with the Basel International Framework. Capital protects the solvency of the swap dealer from losses expected or unexpected and prevents market disruptions so that swap dealers continue to perform their critical market function. Capital reduces the potential for contagion, lowering systemic risk in the financial system and promoting financial stability. The global nature of the financial crisis highlighted the need for the CFTC to coordinate with federal regulators, as foreign swap activities could impact the United States. For example, risk of a foreign subsidiary can flow to their U.S. parent company, same with affiliates. The CFTC's substitutive compliance framework provides for global harmonization and leverages a second regulator, a like-minded foreign regulator that has rules, supervision, and enforcement that are comparable in purpose and effect to ours. But we are not giving up our monitoring, our supervision, and enforcement, as Tom, you spoke about today, and the Chairman and Commissioner Johnson has highlighted. I am mindful that this proposal is the first of its kind, the first substituted compliance determination for the CFTC's capital rules. This was noted by Commissioner Pham in her opening statement, and I agree with her that we should proceed carefully as we are establishing precedent. Importantly, the proposal today is for non-bank swap dealers in Japan, where we have a memorandum of cooperation and a long history of cooperation with the Japanese FSA. It is also meaningful that Japan follows the bank-based approach consistent with Basel International Framework. I will note this would apply to Japanese affiliates of Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs, 3 systemically important institutions and 3 of the largest TARP recipients, having collectively received $60 billion in TARP capital injections. Therefore, it is vital that the CFTC ensures that these swap dealers have adequate amounts of high-quality capital. Public comment will be helpful on whether the CFTC is correct in its preliminary determinations of comparability, and I'm grateful for the staff's very hard work on this. I also want to highlight and express my appreciation for the involvement of the Japanese Financial Services Agency in this process. CFTC's staff engagement with our regulatory counterparts in Japan has really helped to ensure the accuracy of the staff's assessment of Japanese capital and financial reporting, along with supervision and enforcement programs. And I also appreciate the coordination with the other U.S. federal regulators. Substituted compliance does not require an all or nothing determination to just allow all of the home country's requirements. As Josh said, it can be all or some. The CFTC may continue to require compliance with certain of its rules and impose any terms or conditions that it deems appropriate. I strongly support retaining the CFTC's $20 million capital requirement. However, the proposal would not require that that be limited to common equity Tier 1 capital, which is one of the strongest forms of capital, and that is the CFTC's requirement. I look forward to commenters' response on whether the requirements allowing for the type of capital called basic items under Japanese law achieves a comparable outcome to the CFTC's requirement to only accept common equity Tier 1 capital in the $20 million minimum capital requirement. Unlike the CFTC, Japan does not have a requirement for capital tied to the margin for uncleared swaps. I look forward to commentators' response as to whether Japan's capital requirement of 25% of operating expenses achieves a comparable outcome to the CFTC's capital requirement equal to 8% of the uncleared swaps margin. It is a priority for me to ensure that the CFTC guards against complacency with post-crisis reforms, particularly after market stresses from the pandemic and geopolitical events. We should remember that our capital rules serve as critical pillars of Dodd-Frank reforms to help ensure the safety and soundness of financial institutions and to protect the market from serious risk and contagion. The CFTC has a duty to ensure that our comparability assessment is sound and that the foreign regulator is like-minded in not only rules, but in their approach, supervision, and enforcement. I am grateful for the reporting that we will require and the monitoring and supervision that we will continue to conduct, and I look forward to public comments on the proposal. Substituted compliance must leave U.S. markets and our economy at no greater risk than full compliance with our rules. I had a question about the benefits of an MOU, even though I know it's not required, but I think the answer was very, very helpful and thorough. So I won't ask that, although I'll echo my question on that. I have this question that Commissioner Johnson was just ending on, and Tom, you were addressing, which is, how do we know when a foreign swap dealer becomes undercapitalized? What do we do? What are our options? And how do we work with the foreign regulator in that instance? And you were talking about that just now, but maybe if you can go into a little more detail beyond just the notice.
Certainly. So when we look at an FCM, and they're a little bit different, obviously, and I'll discuss that. But generally speaking, when we get a notice that a firm is undercapitalized or has fallen below the early warning level of capital, what we do is contact the firm. So they're obligated to provide us with that notice. And if they don't file the notice, then that's always an issue. But generally speaking, of course, the firms know what the regulatory requirements are, and they file the notice with us that they're undercapitalized. A dialogue commences. We speak to the firm. We speak with, in the U.S., we'll speak to the self-regulatory organization, be it the CME or NFA, if they have oversight responsibility for that entity. We will assess whether they have taken steps to address that. Have they gotten, if let's say it was that they fell into capital, did they get a capital infusion from a parent entity, or what other steps have they taken to address that? If nothing else works for the firm and they're undercapitalized, then the question becomes, does the commission initiate an enforcement action against them for being undercapitalized, or does an exchange requirement kick in where they can no longer be a clearing member in good standing? The question then becomes, how do you port customers? That's in the FCM space, because you have customers that are a clearinghouse. You have to move the book. With respect to swap dealers, we don't have that same immediate issue. We're dealing with counterparties. So now you're looking at a situation where we have to figure out what is the best way to have that dealer manage those counterparty relationships. So in this case with Japan, we would have a conversation with the dealer, we would have a conversation with the FSA as to what steps the firm was taking, either to come back into compliance with the requirements, or to maybe decrease its capital requirements by taking other steps to remove certain assets off its balance sheet that will reduce its exposures and therefore bring them back into capital compliance. So they're very fact specific as to what is the cause of the issue and what steps can be taken to address that issue.
And I think you were talking about this in your answer just now and with Commissioner Johnson, but also with the chairman, that you are just actively engaged at this point, correctly? I mean, you are back and forth with the swap dealer itself, but also the regulator.
Yes.
And this is where I think having a very good relationship, obviously an MOU really is beneficial to that, or short of an MOU, having strong relationships with a like-minded regulator can help facilitate that.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can we talk about the $20 million capital requirement? I know you decided to keep that. I'd like to know why you decided to say keep that, but require that the $20 million capital requirement be met, and then, which I very much support very strongly. But if you can also discuss why you wanted to keep the $20 million capital requirement, and then also the difference between us requiring common equity tier 1 capital with some of the strongest in the world, strongest capital that exists, and while allowing under Japanese law, Japan FSA allows what's called basic items, which is a category of capital. So how do we ensure that we're not requiring less?
Okay. With respect to the $20 million requirement and why we elected to have that as part of the swap dealer rule in general, the first thing is we had 53 or so entities registered with the Commission as swap dealers. We did not know their capital position. We wanted to have a capital rule that would have a minimum floor or a minimum level of capital that, notwithstanding the level of dealing activity or other activity the firm engaged in, it would be required to hold a certain minimum level of capital. Even if that was sort of like a shelf registrant, they voluntarily registered but were not engaged in too much transactions or any transactions, they would still have to have a capital requirement. We took that from our experience with FCMs and retail foreign exchange dealers, particularly with respect to the RFEDs. Those are dealers who engage in off-exchange foreign currency transactions with retail participants. And as you know there, they have a $20 million minimum capital requirement that was established by Congress. We use that here as well because we weren't sure of the capital levels, but we felt that a swap dealer should have at least $20 million of capital. Applying that now to the Japanese environment, the Japan capital rules did not have a minimum requirement. They had their standard Basel-based capital ratios. And given that this is required of U.S. entities, we felt it was important to have that as a condition. So it's a proposed condition right now where, and as you mentioned, the 3 entities that are currently registered from Japan, this is obviously not an issue for them. And I will say that, the level of capital required by the $20 million is not really a systemic risk issue. If that's the driver of the capital, it's clearly a firm that's not engaged in a substantial amount of activity, because the capital rule is the greater of, or you have to meet all of the requirements. So 20 million is the minimum, and then you also have to maintain the capital ratios, which are based on the exposures and the balance sheet of the firm. So to the extent that a 20 million is the requirement or the driver, it's obviously a firm that's engaged in a limited amount of activity and shouldn't present systemic risk. But that's sort of the background. The background was, if you're going to register with the Commission as a swap dealer, even if you're engaged in very limited activity, you should have a certain amount of capital. With respect to Japan, you're correct in pointing out that their structure is different than the CFTC. Instead of having a common equity Tier 1 capital, Tier 2, and then also the in-between additional Tier 1 capital, their structure is basic items and supplemental items. And the basic items are broader than our common equity Tier 1 capital requirement. They allow certain additional types of capital. It's not just primarily common equity, which, as you know, stands sort of last in line for any distributions from the firm in the event of an insolvency. They're the true sort of equity holders. But we felt comfortable with the basic approach in that it is also sort of based on common equity and other types of equity in the firm. And our experience so far has been that the structure of these entities are not complex. In the limited financial reporting we received from the non-U.S. entities, we've generally seen like common equity and retained earnings as comprising most of their capital. We don't see any type of other classes of equity that would be additional Tier 1, for instance, but there could be. So we've asked that question. We'll see what the comments come in, and if it's appropriate as it's calibrated.
Yeah, I very much appreciate that answer, and I appreciate asking the question, and I hope that the public responses we get are broader than the 3 swap dealers and the Japanese FSA, so that we can really have a good sense of it. And I appreciate the analysis that you did in looking at that. I also want to just ask briefly about the 8% uncleared swap margin requirement, capital requirement. And I understand you had mentioned earlier that some of what we have is very focused to the derivatives market, and that this is one of them, and other regulators may have a broader mandate. And I appreciate you putting a question in the proposal about whether this is comparable in outcome to the Japanese capital requirement of 25% of operating expenses. Can you talk about sort of the origin of the 8% uncleared swap margin capital requirement? Sort of what are the risks that is designed to address? Because it looks as if the Japanese capital requirement is really focused on operating risk.
Yes, so in developing the final capital rule for the swap dealers, the commission put in a requirement that each swap dealer would have to maintain capital in excess of 8% of the uncleared swaps margin. That is comparable or consistent with the FCM capital rule, which is based on customer margin amount. It was incorporated into the swap dealer rules and basically made the greater of the traditional, in the bank-based approach, the traditional Basel rule or the 8% of uncleared swaps margin. The idea was one thing that all of the swap dealers would have in common that were registered with us, no matter which method that they elected, the net liquid asset or the bank-based approach, is that they're all swap dealers. Therefore, they all have uncleared swaps margin on their books. And the greater the risk with those positions, or the more positions that the entity puts on, the capital requirement increases, because if you have a very plain vanilla simple swap, it's 8% of the margin on that. If you have a much more exotic swap, the initial margin under the margin rules is going to be much higher, and you'll have to have a corresponding increase in your minimum capital requirement. The concept of it, though, was also, we were gaining experience and understanding with Basel. That was not how the FCMs were structured for us with respect to capital requirements. But we wanted to get some experience. But that was one thing that was uniform across all the deals. It was intended also to be a floor. It was not intended to be the driver. Really, the Basel requirement was intended to be the driver. It was intended to be a floor that would increase, though, with respect to the amount of activity engaged in by the firm. It was intended to cover all types of risks, market risk, credit risk, legal risk, operational risk of the entity. With respect to Japan, their approach is more consistent with Basel in the sense that their requirement is they include operational risk in total risk-weighted assets. So they add it to market risk and credit risk, then add on top of that the operational risk. So there it's an incremental requirement or an additive requirement, where with the CFTC, it's a standalone separate requirement relative to the Basel requirement.
I appreciate that, and we've talked about that before, how that's an incremental requirement. I think that's helpful for the public to know as well, and I'm looking forward to the public comments on that. I also appreciate you talking about, you can look at the three current non-bank swap dealers that are in Japan now, but we have to think about what could happen in the future, and we're trying to establish something that would move forward for the future. And lots of things can change, and there can also be new entrants. And so I appreciate you being thoughtful about looking at where we are currently, and the situation currently doesn't mean we match our requirements to that. We're clearly trying to build up and require strong capital requirements. So thank you for all of your hard work. It's been a pleasure to engage and work with you and work to make this better collaboratively. And I'm looking forward to the public comment. And again, we just have to ensure that substituted compliance must leave our U.S. markets and our economy at no greater risk than if the CFTC rules apply. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero. Commissioner Mersinger.
Thank you, and thank you for all the discussion so far and for your very thorough answers to the questions. I believe a lot of my questions have been answered so far as well. But I did want to make a couple of comments, and just kind of going back to my opening remarks and also my comments before the DCO governance. I think this is another unique characteristic of the CFTC, and it's our ability to work with foreign regulators and collaborate with foreign regulators, understanding that our markets are global, and that this international cooperation is necessary, and we do need to allow for some deference when there is a comprehensive and comparable home country regulation. When the G20 leaders met in Pittsburgh in 2009, that was in response to the financial crisis, and they recognized this global nature of the derivatives markets and were committed to taking action to raise standards together so that national authorities would implement global standards consistently and in a way to ensure a level playing field. In doing so, that would avoid market fragmentation, protectionist policies, and regulatory arbitrage. Congress memorialized these commitments in Dodd-Frank, and the CFTC has worked very hard to implement a regulatory framework that respects these commitments. And in accordance with those regulations, the Financial Services Agency of Japan submitted their application requesting that the Commission determine Japan's capital adequacy and financial reporting requirements and related financial record keeping and reporting requirements for non-U.S. non-bank swap dealers are comparable to corresponding CFTC regulations. That's the proposed order we are reviewing today, and I know it took countless hours of work from MPD staff, so thank you all for what you have done to bring this before us today, and as well as our counterparts in Japan, because my understanding is they've been very engaged with us since the start of this and have worked very closely with us in order to get this proposal ready. I think when we're doing these comparability determinations, it is important that we look at them as a principle-based, holistic approach. We focus on whether the other country's regime achieves comparable outcomes to the corresponding CFTC requirements. Certainly, this is a major undertaking, and I know it's taken years, and this is the first of several steps the Commission will have to take and consider. So I understand the work here is just getting started, but again, appreciate MPD staff's diligence and continued efforts on these complex and really labor-intensive analysis that you're doing. I have one quick question, and it has been brought up, both Commissioner Pham and the chairman brought up this no action letter that is in effect currently, because these do take so long to complete and get right, that we have had to issue temporary no action relief to the non-bank swap dealers, kind of subject to pending Commission review of the comparability determinations. And this is just the first of many to come. And I know the current no action letter, which have been mentioned, does expire on October 6th. And I understand that there is, efforts to extend that. But even with the comparability determination before us, with a 60-day comment period, we'll be receiving comments just before the no action relief is set to expire. And I know you all are clearly capable of Herculean tasks. I think expecting some sort of a final comparability determination before that expiration is unlikely. So I guess my question is, what happens if that no action relief should expire and we don't have, not only is this comparability determination, final, but we don't have others in place either? What would happen? What would be the result?
Well, I hope we don't get to that stage. We do have, and we do plan to provide the Commission very shortly the no action letter for your consideration on an absent objection basis. So the goal would be to issue that extension while we continue with these determinations and work with the commission to get those finalized with whatever conditions we think are appropriate, so that we try to do that as soon as possible. As I said, it should be with the commission very shortly for absent objection consideration. We'd get it out. That would, one, alert the public to that effect and the dealers. But what would to happen if that letter was not issued and we get to October 7th of this year, the firms technically would have to comply with the CFTC rule. I'm sure that would result in substantial system adjustments they would need to make, books and record adjustments they would need to make. So it would be a very heavy burden on them, which, based on our, the first no action letter, at least speaking for myself, I wouldn't think that's necessary, given that they all are subject to a capital regime right now in their home country.
Thank you, and I look forward to reviewing the no action letter when it's before us. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Mersinger. Commissioner Pham.
Thank you, Chairman. First off, I want to recognize the staff's work, as each of my fellow commissioners has done, because this is not easy, particularly not only this rulemaking, but also, generally speaking, swap dealer oversight, because it's an incredibly complex regulatory regime. I also appreciate your commitment to providing substituted compliance. So I would appreciate it if the staff addressed my concerns directly with me. In addition, in my past work in Japan and with their financial sector, I have enjoyed working with the Japan FSA for many years, and I appreciate their thoughtful and robust oversight of their regulated firms. I also want to say that my thoughts and heart are with the people of Japan regarding the tragic loss of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. As I stated in my opening statement, the CFTC should take an outcomes-based approach to substituted compliance that appropriately balances and recognizes the nature of cross-border regulation of global markets and firms that preserves access for U.S. persons to other markets. I appreciate the Chairman's remarks and welcome comments, particularly on operational issues with additional reporting requirements given the time difference, language translation, conversion to USD, local governance and regulatory requirements, differences in financial reporting, and I urge a pragmatic approach with sufficient time to implement before any compliance date. And I appreciate the thought that the staff have been putting into that and the discussion today. I speak from my past experience as a global head of swap dealer compliance who had to implement global regulatory reforms. I'll also note that in a crisis, such as during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was timely and effective engagement between and amongst CFTC registrants and U.S. regulators. I have been on many calls and spoken to many regulators all over the world, not only during COVID-19, but also during times of market disruption or potentially material events. There is a difference between a phone call and a formal written notice, and so I appreciate receiving comments on this and any other operational issues and the careful consideration by the staff and the Commission of how to take a practical approach to achieving appropriate oversight and mitigation of risk to the United States and to our markets. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Commissioner Pham. We did reserve time for a second round, 3 minutes. No, okay, wonderful. So with that, thanks again to the team. Excellent presentation and excellent back and forth with the commission, and we look forward to the comments, as was said by my colleagues. So having heard from the commissioners, if there's no further discussion or debate, we'll proceed to a vote on the pending motion to approve and issue the notice of proposed order and request for comment on the application for capital comparability determination that was submitted by the Financial Services Agency of Japan, as presented in the voting draft. The commissioner is prepared to vote. As it appears, the commission is ready to vote. Mr. Kirkpatrick, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The motion now before the Commission is on the approval and issuance of the Japan non-bank swap dealer proposed comparability determination and request for comment, as presented in the voting draft circulated to the Commissioners. Commissioner Pham.
I concur.
Commissioner Pham concurs. Commissioner Mersinger.
Yes.
Commissioner Mersinger votes yes. Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero.
Yes.
Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero votes yes. Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson votes aye. Chairman Behnam.
Aye.
Chairman Behnam votes aye. Mr. Chairman, on this matter, the ayes have 4, and there is 1 vote to concur.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkpatrick. The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the notice of proposed order and request for comment on an application for capital comparability determination submitted by the Financial Services Agency of Japan is approved to be issued by the Commission. So having completed the planned agenda items for this meeting, we are now going to turn to our closing remarks, and I'm going to begin in reverse order. So if Commissioner Pham, you're prepared to make any closing remarks you'd like, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to thank everybody for their time here today, not only the staff of the Commission, but also for those market participants that closely follow what we do each and every day because of the impact it has on their business and on global markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pham. Commissioner Mersinger.
Just short statement here. Just want to again say thank you to the staff of MPD. Thank you to the staff of DCR and the legal division as well, and certainly the Secretariat's office, who has done an amazing job of making sure we can have these meetings both virtually and in person. So they've done a lot of great work over the last few years in very difficult circumstances. I also want to thank my staff, Terry Arbit, Libby, Master Giacomo, who's with me up here, and Chris Lucas for all their help in preparing me for this first open meeting. And certainly I would be remiss if I didn't mention the hard work of our technology staff and our logistics team for their part in making sure that today's meeting was a success. Everything from every little detail from, our microphones working to having water, to the technology so we can do these meetings both in person and virtually is really a testament to our teams in the technology offices and the logistics office. So without all their hard work and efforts, we wouldn't be able to function as an agency and certainly not be able to hold an open meeting. So with that, thanks everyone, and I will turn over the rest of my time.
Thanks, Commissioner Mersinger. Commissioner Goldsmith-Romero.
Thank you to all the staff in the CFTC who worked on these proposals and on this open meeting and everything that went into it. Thank you for working to ensure that our financial system and markets are strong, are safe, resilient, fair, and transparent. I am always impressed by your expertise and sincere interest in reaching these broader public interests while balancing all of the competing policy, legal, and operational issues and 5 different commissioners. You do a remarkable job navigating all of that. Thank you for being true public servants and taking the CFTC's oversight role to heart. Thank you to my colleagues on the Commission. As I said at the beginning, I sincerely benefit from all your insights, your thoughtful comments, your diversity of experience, and that was certainly true today, and I hope that the public is able to see that. Chairman Behnam, thank you for holding this open meeting. I found it incredibly helpful to hear everyone's thoughts and to hear the dialogue and the things that people care about, and I appreciate that opportunity to have this and to meet as a commission in this open forum. I also have to thank my staff, who are just rock stars in getting me prepared and really digging deep into these issues so that they can understand and ensure that the public interests that need to be met are absolutely met here. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Johnson.
Thanks so much, Chair Behnam. I also want to echo my fellow commissioners' thanks to the staff who have made today's meeting possible, working behind the scenes, I'm sure late into the evening yesterday and early this morning to ensure that we were able to hold this very important public forum and hold this very important public meeting and have a forum to discuss the ideas and views we exchanged. Simply stated, the 2 proposals before us aim to future-proof financial markets, emphatically addressing risk management oversight and ensuring adequate capitalization of critical market infrastructure and critical market participants. For each matter, today's actions mark the Commission's efforts to and commitment to clarify, carefully consider, and codify requirements Our efforts today will lead to clarity regarding the application of existing and newly implemented regulation. Upon conclusion of a rigorous debate and comprehensive and dynamic dialogue among domestic and international regulators, regulated entities, other stakeholders, and citizens in our communities will benefit from the broad range of interests and views exchanged and the development of policy that aims to best achieve goals in our mandate. Our efforts today to codify measures and enhance systemic risk management and mitigate the likelihood of events such as counterparty credit default, liquidity or solvency crises, or others that threaten the safety and soundness of our financial markets. I would be remiss if I didn't pause to say thank you very much to my own staff and to ensure that my staff and I, our door is open. We are excited to meet and have spent significant time over the last 3 months traveling across the United States and abroad to hear diverse viewpoints from a broad range of shareholders. What we find to be true in our search for an understanding of where each market participant stands is that two values codified by this commission and in the statute and regulations that govern our actions are often top of mind. The first is customer protection. As I mentioned at the outset, one of my highest priorities personally and as a public servant committed to this particular opportunity. Second, the integrity of financial markets, which was clearly a theme that resonated across the comments and conversations had today and will likely continue to resonate and echo through the comments we'll receive in response to these two proposals. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Johnson, and thanks to all of my fellow commissioners for the great meeting. It was fun. It was good to be here. I think, as Clark and Amanda pointed out, with a new commission after a few years, it's really exciting to be back in person, see some faces, and I think we're going to build off of this. Hopefully after some rest and a little reflection in August, we'll come back in September and get some more work done, and look forward to doing that with my colleagues. But a special thanks to MPD for this presentation, and everyone here, to DCR for the presentation earlier, and of course to the Office of the General Counsel. You are integrated in all this work, so we thank you very much for your work, Rob, and your team. I do want to recognize the Secretariat, and thank you, Commissioner Mersinger, for doing that, the Secretariat and everyone involved in putting today's meeting together. It is not easy. We're a little rusty, but I think we pulled it off pretty smoothly given where we are and what we're trying to accomplish, especially with a hybrid environment where we have both virtual and in person. So with that, a lot to look forward to. I do want to recognize my staff. I mentioned earlier Alicia Lewis, who helped on the DCR front and also was integral to the MRAC recommendations, which, I do, as I said earlier, want to recognize all the individuals who were a part of that effort. And I certainly do look forward, as the public has seen in the past month or so. Each of the new commissioners is now sponsor of an advisory committee, and I think we'll have some exciting things to look forward to as a commission, and as a market, as we hear more from market participants and public interest. So a lot to look forward to, but again, I want to say thanks to everyone. Enjoy August. We'll be in touch. Of course, as always, thanks to my fellow commissioners. And with no other commission business, I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
I second that motion.
Those in favor of the motion to adjourn the meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.